You don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Dead up perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look up better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the third part of What If Deku Enters Gravity Falls. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of jkawsome on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Mina pounded against the wood of the box they were being kept in. Eventually, she gave up and slid down onto the floor. Ugh. This is all my fault. I'm so sorry, Shadow. And they hadn't even told Izuku and Ochako what they were doing. Would the two come looking for them? Would Mina ever see her home and parents again? Her eyes stung, and she rubbed at them. Shadow sat down next to her in silence. After a moment, he muttered something under his breath. Mina turned to look at him. What was that? Shadow took a deep breath. I'm sorry too, for dismissing you earlier. Shadow fiddled with his pin. We're all taking this whole stuck in another world thing differently, and I shouldn't have been so harsh. Besides, you were the one who figured out most of the clues that uncovered this mystery. It's okay, seriously, she assured him. Besides, you figured out a clue yourself. Mina's hands shook as she pulled her knees to her chest. You were right. I went around announcing to everyone that we were from another world, and now they're gonna take us away because of it. I thought you were just being paranoid and grumpy, but you were right. We both messed up, then, and now we've both apologized? Shadow gave a small shrug. I think that makes us even. All right then. Mina gave him a watery smile and snapped off a bit of peanut brittle from Tremblay's encasement. Truce? He eyed the brittle. Isn't that stuff hundreds of years old? I mean, it has held him all this time. It's probably not too bad. After a moment of internal debate, Shadow took the brittle. Truce, mystery crew, and all that. Mina smirked. I thought you hated that name when Suze called us that. Shadow looked away. I guess it's been growing on me. And we did just solve a real mystery just now, so I think... He cut himself off, eyes going wide. What the hell? A cracking sound captured Mina's attention, and she turned to look at what Shadow was seeing. Thin lines were appearing all over the peanut brittle that held Tremblay captive. Then the whole thing crumbled down around the frozen man, leaving him intact. It is I, he announced. Quentin Tremblay, and with that, he tore off his pants in true patriotic fashion. Shadow gaped at him. You're alive. You're actually alive. Peanut brittle does really preserve someone's life. Mina waved around the brittle she was still holding for emphasis. You're actually kind of brilliant. And so are you too, Tremblay smiled. For following my clues and freeing me from my delicious tomb, he took a look around them. By Jefferson, we seem to be trapped in some sort of crate-shaped box. Pretty sure it's just a crate, Shadow remarked. Aha, good thing I have the president's key, which can open any lock in America. Tremblay moved over to the edge of the crate and jabbed the side with his key, a couple times at first, but then more rapidly, and with an air of annoyance. Don't think that's going to work, Mina offered. Would, scoffed Tremblay, my age-old nemesis. He turned to them. In order to get out of here, this is going to take the silliest plan ever conceived. He pounded his fist for emphasis. Shadow turned to Mina and gave her a look, as if to say, well, this one's on you. Mina hummed and looked around the crate. How about that hole? She pointed at a small hole in the wood. We will leap through it, Tremblay declared. He pounced at the hole, and with a look and a shrug, Shadow and Mina leaped after him. With the combined strength of two teenagers and an adult, the crate gave way around them, setting them all free. Wonderful work, you two, Tremblay said. I knew I could count on the siblings. The what, Mina coughed awkwardly. We're not siblings. We're not even related. Shadow stared at the man as if he had finally gone bonkers. We don't even look alike. What gave you the impression that we were siblings? Are you sure? Tremblay asked. I was positive that I would be rescued from my tomb by two twins. Are you sure that you aren't them? Pretty positive. Mina patted Tremblay's shoulder. Don't worry, you can't get them all right. She scooped up the documents that had put them into this predicament, which the policeman had left on the floor right outside of their crate. Come on, we need to get out of here, before we get too far away from Gravity Falls. They raced to the end of the car and opened the door to find the deputy getting some ice. Seeing them, he dropped the bucket. Blubs, he called out. The sheriff came out of their car as the three ran to the other end of the car. It says do not enter, Mina said. The emergency exit. Shadow grabbed the ladder rungs and climbed upwards, pushing open the exit door. Mina and Tremblay followed him, emerging on the roof of the train car. Wind whipped around Mina's face as she took a moment to find her footing, watching the trees zooming past them. The three ran down the length of the roof, stopping when the next train car was a bunch of logs instead of a normal cabin. With nowhere else to go, they turned to face the policeman, who had caught up to them. There is no escape, Blubs panted. I gotta take a knee. He fell on one knee, and the deputy took his shoulders with concern. Are you okay? The deputy asked. Can I get you anything? Blubs smiled at him. Edwin Durland, you are a diamond in the rough. Shadow coughed awkwardly. Blubs, are you seriously gonna lock us all away in a government facility, just like that? Blubs winced. I got no choice, kid. Our orders come from the very top. Mina frowned in thought, then brightened and turned to Tremblay. Hang on. Tremblay, did you ever sign an official resignation? Shadow's eyes widened, and Mina knew he had caught on. Tremblay stood tall and proud. No, sir. I ate a salamander and jumped out the window. Then technically, you're still legally the President of the United States, Shadow said. He turned to Blubs and Durland. So you have to answer to him. He is the very top, after all. The two policemen gasped. As President of these several United States, Tremblay proclaimed, I hereby order you to pretend none of this ever happened, and go on a delightful vacation. He jumped as a pole sticking out from the side of the cliff they were going past hit his head. Oh, yeah. The policemen looked at each other, and Mina hoped they'd take the bait. Vacation? Blubs said with a smile. What place have you always wanted to visit? Silly water fun slides in Grand Lakes, Michigan, Durland cheered. Mina breathed a sigh of relief. With the two cops on their way to Michigan, the three got off back at Gravity Falls train station. Mina stretched out her arms, relief filling her body at the fact that they were back in this weird little town. She never would have thought she'd miss it this much. Tremblay knelt down and put his hand on Mina's shoulder. You done a great service to your country, Mina. Mina decided not to tell him she was really from Japan as he rummaged through his pockets and pulled out a foldable top hat. As thanks, I'd like to make you an official US congressman. He placed the hat on Mina's head. She turned to Shadow with a grin. He eyed her wearily. Oh no, Mina snickered. And Shadow, Tremblay focused on him. I cannot make a congressman because you are already a member of the Secret Order of the Pine Trees. The what? Shadow looked down. You mean this? This is just a pin I got from the Shack's gift shop. However. Of course. I can bestow upon you this, he held out his key, the President's key, to unlock the secrets of this wonderful land. Shadow took it and put it in his pocket. They walked into town together, where the celebrations were still going strong, as Tremblay told them some interesting stories about his past. And then he chased me around and spanked me with a paddle for like 3 hours. Bottom line, George Washington was a jerk. Sounds like one, Mina said sympathetically. They stumbled across Pacifica, who was getting into the car with her snooty parents. Aren't you going to show her the documents? Shadow asked. Mina watched them get ready to drive away. After everything they had accomplished that day, the embarrassment and frustration she had felt at the blonde girl earlier was pretty much gone. You know what? Mina smiled. I've got nothing to prove. All the people who matter think I look awesome. I know I look awesome. Who cares what she thinks of me? I know what really matters. Shadow frowned. Mina wondered if she had said something wrong, but then, well, I just don't like her. And with that, he took the documents and handed them to Pacifica through the window. Nathaniel Northwest didn't found Gravity Falls, and your whole family is a sham. Deal with it. Mina laughed at Pacifica's screech as the car pulled away. Children, I am needed elsewhere, Trembly said. Just know that I will always be right here, on the -$12 bill. Mina took the bill with wonder. Wow, this is worthless. It's less than worthless, my girl, Trembly corrected. Trembly away. And with that, the 8th president jumped backwards onto a horse, which galloped away. They watched in awe. You know, Shadow started, we were supposed to get blue paint. Aw man, I knew I forgot something. And with that, the two ran off to finally get that paint. Your friends were going to get the paint, right? Candy asked as she fitted one of the puppets with a shirt. Ochako nodded. That's what they said. And with Shadow and Mina, they can usually keep each other on track. She glanced at the path in the woods. I'm surprised they've taken this long. They should have been back hours ago. Izuku tapped the table nervously. I'm starting to get really worried. As if on cue, the two burst out of the woods and onto the beach, both carrying cans of paint. We have returned, Mina announced, flinging her arms in the air for extra emphasis. And we come bearing paints. The kids working on the set pieces immediately swarmed them. Looks like we didn't have to worry. Ochako waited for the two to make their way over. What took you guys so long? We got caught up in a government cover-up, Shadow deadpanned. We met the 8th president of the United States, Mina added, and ran on top of a train, and now I'm an congressman. We met Stan in town. He was locked up in one of those old-time wooden things for cutting off hands. Shadow pulled out an old-looking key. Apparently, the president's key works on locks like that. Izuku blinked. Sounds like you guys had a huge adventure. And without us? Seriously? Ochako pouted. Mina and Shadow shared a smile, and Ochako noticed they seemed much less on edge with each other than before. Maybe this whole adventure was good for them. The two sat down at the table. Shadow picked up a sock. Now all we need to do is wait for Suze to fix the laptop, and we're back on track to getting home. And we need to finish this play, Mina interjected. We did make a commitment. Shadow sighed, but it lacked any heat, and Ochako took that as a victory. The rest of the day passed by quickly, and the sock opera started to take shape. The sun rose on another beautiful Gravity Falls morning. Birds sang, flowers bloomed, manitors chased a bear with multiple heads around the forest, and 4 friends gathered in the town's most popular tourist trap. All right, gang, Izuku set the newly fixed laptop down on the kitchen table with a loud thud. It was still cracked and rusted in places, and there was a lot of tape holding it together, but it would hopefully work anyways. Suze fixed up the laptop, and now we finally get to see what's inside. About time, Shadow said, leaning forward. I'm so ready to get out of this place and go back home. Ochako gave a small laugh. Aw, it's not that bad. Not that I don't want to go home too, she added hastily at their friend's expression. But you have to admit, we had a lot of fun here in Gravity Falls. And we still have 4 days before the puppet show, Mina added. Even if we do uncover a way to get home, we should finish that first. We did promise to help, Izuku agreed, ignoring Shadow's glare. What kind of heroes would we be if we went back on a promise to help a group of little kids? Heroes that found our way home, Shadow snarked, but left it at that. Izuku shook his head and opened up the laptop. The computer itself was bulky, and it definitely looked like something from a long time ago. A large sticker saying Property of F was stuck across the top of the inside. Was the author named something that started with an F? Izuku pressed on, and the screen lit up with a green glow, words and numbers appearing and running down the screen itself. Small green boxes lit up, one right after the other until the computer had fully loaded. Lines and spirals appeared, twisting around until they made 4 small circles on the corners and a circle inside a triangle in the center. The top of the screen said welcome. Ochako bounced around her seat in excitement. It worked. We really are the mystery crew. I say that once, and now apparently it's our catchphrase, Shadow complained. He had a small smile on his face, however, and Izuku knew he was just as excited as the rest of them. Then the screen flashed red. Ah, unauthorized access, password needed, Mina groaned. The age-old enemy of anyone who wants to snoop in another's stuff. Shadow glared at the laptop. Seriously? After all that, we're still not even in the computer yet? It makes sense, Izuku reasoned. This is the author we're talking about, and you saw how many traps and defense mechanisms he had in the bunker. It isn't that surprising that he'd use a passcode for his computer, where he might have hidden even more stuff. You've got a point there. Ochako hummed to herself for a moment, looking at the screen. It's 8 letters, right? What about password? That's 8 letters, it could fit. She turned the laptop towards herself and typed in her guess. Unfortunately, nothing came out of it, as a beeping noise informed them that the guess was incorrect. Hey, it was a good guess, Mina encouraged her, stepping on Shadow's foot before he could say anything. There's around 7 million 8-letter words, if I remember correctly, Izuku mused. That's a lot of material to cover for 4 people, especially since we can only enter one guess at a time. Mina looked at him with surprise. How did you even know that? Izuku flushed awkwardly. I read a bunch of the cryptology books that were in the library a few days ago. The author writes a lot of his notes in the journal in code, so I was looking up how to decipher them. What if the password is a code, and not a word at all? Shadow said aloud. The 4 of them looked at each other in silence for a moment. Ochako gave a helpless shrug. We should probably just start by trying words out anyways. The other 3 quickly agreed. If it is a code, Izuku thought grimly, we may never be able to crack it. There are just too many different options to try, and since all we know about the author is from what they wrote in the journals, the passcode could refer to something we've never even heard of before. He shook his head. That didn't matter. As much as Izuku enjoyed it here, he needed to get home, to his mom and to All Might, and so that he could become the hero he always wanted to be. We should start typing then, Shadow said suddenly, grabbing the laptop and pulling it towards himself. Let's start by trying out any 8-letter words that pertain to the supernatural. The author is more likely to use words that come from his work. Smart thinking, Ochako leaned over his shoulder. What about wondrous, conjured, darkness? Shadow typed all of them in, but each time, the laptop beeped. We should probably go to the library. They're sure to have some books that could help us. Speaking of going places, Mina checked her watch. It was a cheap model, as the 4 had used some of their money from the photo contest to buy themselves things like watches, and had picked out the most affordable ones they could find. It's almost 9, we need to head down to the beach to help with the puppet show. Ochako jumped out of her chair. That's right, we need to go. We literally just started working on the laptop. Shadow reminded them, exasperation filling his voice. But Mina already had a counter-argument lined up. And like Izuku said, there are literally millions of different 8-letter words. A couple of days working on a project that will make some kids happy is nothing. Don't worry, Izuku tried to assure his friend. Once the play is over, we'll get straight to work on the laptop, I promise. All of us want to go home, but if we panic over it, it won't lead us anywhere. He hoped that would convince Shadow. Shadow hesitated for a few moments more, looking back and forth between them and the laptop. After a few tense seconds, he sighed and got to his feet, closing and picking up the laptop as he did so. He tucked the device under his arm. Fine, I'll help. But I'm working on this every chance I get, even if I have to do it alone. It's a deal, Izuku smiled, relieved. Just don't push yourself too hard, okay? Like I said, we'll help you when the puppet show is all over. Shadow pushed past him and walked out the door. Izuku winced as the other boy went. If only there was something he could say to convince Shadow that they all meant well. But when it came to the red and white-haired boy, he came up empty on good ideas. He just didn't know enough about Shadow to have a real heart-to-heart with the other team. Welp, you heard him. Let's go! Mina jogged out the door and quickly caught up to Shadow, engaging him in a conversation about the 2's most recent adventure. Izuku could see Shadow respond with a softness the other boy rarely showed. Izuku and Ochako followed them. It's nice that those 2 are getting along a lot better, Ochako commented. I was kind of worried there for a while. Yeah, me too. Now, if only Izuku could talk to him like that. Double time, everyone? Miss Miller called out, walking between the different tables of teenagers and preteens working on puppets and sets. We have 4 days left, so we have to make them count. Ochako outfitted her current puppet with its tiny jacket, which had been carefully made by Izuku. Is it just me, or are there a lot less people here today than the days before? She had noticed that when they first walked up to the group, how many tables were empty, especially when it came to those working on the sets. "Oh, they're still helping," Candy assured her. "They're just moving some of the set pieces over to where the show will take place. No big deal." Izuku smiled. "That's a relief. I was worried people dropped out right before the show began, but I guess we're all good." "Yeah, and if they had, a certain someone might have to actually work on the puppet show." Grenda looked pointedly over at the other end of the table. "I mean you, Shoto." Shoto didn't even dignify her words with a response, continuing to type. Grenda frowned, looking a little hurt. "At least stop with the beeping noise. It's getting on my nerves." "Please?" Izuku begged him. "You can work on it afterwards, just help us for now." Shoto looked as though he wanted to argue, but must have realized that they were all going to continue bugging him to help, because he said, "Fine, just for now." The other two girls cheered, and Ochako couldn't help but laugh and cheer along with them. She also couldn't help but notice how frazzled Shoto was looking. The sudden observation caught her by surprise, and she took a closer look at her friend. Sure enough, there were bags underneath his eyes, and his clothes were rumpled in ways they hadn't been before. Ochako felt a twinge of guilt. Shoto was obviously taking everything harder than the rest of them. How had she not noticed before? "Once this puppet show is over, we'll all help as much as we can with a laptop," she decided. But for now, she grabbed a puppet and tossed it to Shoto. "Here, can you put googly eyes on this one?" "Yes," Shoto said flatly. "I can in fact put googly eyes on a sock puppet." "Good. Then let's get this done." "Look, I appreciate the dedication to figuring out the password. I really do," Mina yawned from in her bed. "But none of us can get to sleep with that beeping noise." It was nighttime, and the only light in the room came from the full moon outside, and from the green screen of the laptop, which flashed red every few seconds as Shoto tried another 8-letter passcode. Izuku buried himself in his sleeping bag, pressing the sides against his ears as he tried to sleep. "Sorry about that." Shoto pulled on a sweatshirt jacket, picked up the laptop, as well as scraps of paper with different ideas for the password on them, and made his way out of the attic. "I'll work downstairs." "You should get some sleep," Izuku suggested. "You stayed up all of the last 3 nights as well. That's not really good for you." After a moment, he added, "You can always work on the laptop more in the morning." "Not when you 3 are making me work on puppets all day." Bitterness seemed to seep into Shoto's voice. "I said I'd work on this by myself if I needed to, and I will. Go back to sleep, I'm going downstairs." Izuku watched him go. Should he say something? Convince him to stay somehow? But the door closed shut behind Shoto, and Izuku had said nothing that could change his friend's mind. He balled up the sleeping bag in his fists in frustration. Why was there nothing he could say or do to help Shoto? Was he really that useless? "Deku, I can hear you thinking from here," Ochako murmured, head half buried in her pillow. "Please go to sleep." "Oh, sorry." Izuku rolled over and closed his eyes, but the lack of both beeping noises and Shoto shifting around next to him was deafening in and of itself. Shoto crept downstairs to the kitchen, only to find Stan snoring in one of the chairs, his head face first down on the kitchen table. Shoto grimaced, knowing he'd never be able to concentrate with that amount of noise going on, even if he went to the living room. But it wasn't like he could go back upstairs, he'd just get told off by the other students again. The rooftop. He hadn't been up there since that day with Wendy and the ghosts, but it was as good of a spot as any to work uninterrupted. Shoto went into the gift shop and pulled down the ladder. Tucking the papers and laptop under his arm, he climbed up to the roof and over the side, to where Wendy's icebox, chair, and umbrella were situated. He debated on sitting in the chair, but in the end decided to just sit on the edge of the roof, dangling his legs over the edge. Academic abstract bulletin equation nothing. Absolutely nothing. Shoto groaned and ran a hand through his hair. Just another useless guess, like all the rest of them. He put another word in and got the same beeping noise he had with all the others. Shoto was starting to despise that noise. He shouldn't be doing this alone. The other 3 students should be helping him. He wouldn't have to stay up all night long for a bunch of nights in a row if the others would just forget their stupid puppet project and help him. Here Shoto was, spending night after night worrying about getting home, and then working on the laptop that could send them there, while the other 3 people he was trapped with here making fools of themselves. And yet I've gotten nowhere. I really am useless without my quirk. Shadow tried to shake the thought away and failed. He buried his head in his hands. Why could he never do anything right in this place? He missed Fayumi. How was she doing at the moment, all alone with their father in that damn house? It had been, 2 or so weeks since they first came to Gravity Falls. Shadow had been counting at the beginning, but with all the sleepless nights he had gone through, at some point he had lost track. Whatever the number was, it didn't change the fact that the only family member who had stuck with him through thick and thin was now at the mercy of their father, and it was all his fault. If she hadn't felt the need to stay for him, if he hadn't been careless and been caught by that portal villain, she wouldn't be in the position she was undoubtedly in now. He had to get back to her, had to make sure she was okay. Shadow wanted his sister back, wanted his quirk back, wanted his life back. And he still couldn't figure out the damn password. Shadow unsuccessfully tried to stifle a yawn. There has to be some sort of shortcut or clue, he muttered out loud. But who would know about the author's secret codes, Izuku? He would have said something at this point, but Shadow couldn't think of anyone else. The breeze suddenly picked up, slamming the laptop shut and spinning the weather vane on top of the shack around and around. Shadow pulled the ends of his jacket closer together at the sudden chill, wishing he had thought to zip her up. He stood up to go on inside when something about the night sky changed, and Shadow's back was lit up with light. He turned around to see a thin back line rolling over the side of the moon, before focusing directly on him. A chill ran through Shadow as the wind picked up speed, whipping his hair in the opposite direction of the strange moon. Things got even stranger. Blue blocks of different sizes appeared from out of thin air, forming around the moon, which now looked much more like a strange slitted eye into the shape of a triangle. A flash of light, and everything around Shadow lost its color as the triangle gained legs, arms, and a top hat, and went from light blue to bright yellow, as though it had sucked all the color from the world. Then the voice, scratchy and somewhat high-pitched, with a distinctly alien feel to it. "I think I know a guy," the triangle pointed at itself. Well, you're pretty persistent, aren't you, Pine Tree?" Shadow blinked. Didn't Trembly say something similar about pine trees? "Who are you?" he managed to get out. "What do you want?" "Who am I? Oh, that's right." The being almost seemed to laugh. "This is the first time we've met in this world." The being glided closer, and Shadow found himself inching away before he could stop it. "The name's Bill Cipher. It's good to finally meet you, kiddo." "Right," Shadow deadpanned, trying to hide the fact that Cipher sent all of his nerves tingling at once, in all the wrong ways. "It's nice to meet you too, I guess. Is there a reason why you wanted to talk to me?" "Straight to the point, I like that. You deserve a prize. Here, have a head that's always screaming." Cipher clapped his hands, and a blue-tinged bodiless head fell onto the roof, screeching at the top of its lungs. A startled yelp tore from Shadow's throat, as he instinctively moved away. He quickly regained his composure. "I'm just messing with you, kiddo," Cipher laughed. "Let's get rid of this thing." The head began to peel itself away, layer by layer, until all that was left was bone, and even that dissolved. Shadow stared at the place it had just been, thoroughly unnerved. He looked back up at Cipher. "What are you exactly?" he demanded of the triangle, and wasn't that a strange sentence? "Oh, just your friendly interdimensional being, hoping to finally chat with another lost soul." Cipher's voice dipped at the fellow lost soul part, as if implying something Shadow was just beginning to grasp. "All the beings I've ever been able to contact before were from this dimension, which is boring. But you're special like me. I've been waiting for a chance to talk." "You," Shadow gaped, the full reality of Cipher's sentences hitting him all at once. "You're not from this world either." "Got it in one. Just what I expect from you." Cipher leaned closer. "It seems to me we've got opposite problems. For starters, I know everything there is to know about everything. Omnipotence is a blast. But I can't leave the mindverse, or interact with almost anything in the real world, so I'm separated from all my friends. And you're in the real world. You could go home if you knew how, but you don't, so you're just as stuck as me." "Looks like we've both got our issues then," Shadow agreed. It was so strange, meeting something from yet another world. Cipher was unlike anything he'd ever encountered before. That did make sense. After all, there must be worlds that were nothing like Earth. But still, something about Cipher made Shadow uneasy. Ain't that the truth? But the point is, I like you, kid. And I think we could both help each other out. I give you the hint you're looking for the laptop, and you give me a small favor in return. We'll both be on our way to seeing those we like again. Cipher held out his hand, and blue flames sprung out around it. What do you say? Do we have a deal? Shadow almost put his hand out. He wanted to get home, more than anything. He promised himself he'd find a way to not be useless. Cipher was offering him a way to get both of the things he wanted. But something about Cipher set him off in all the wrong ways. Maybe it was unfair to Cipher, but Shadow couldn't muster enough trust to make the deal. The others promised they'd help with the laptop starting right after the play was over. He thought back to the heartfelt conversation he'd had on the train. Mina promised she'd help. I don't need Cipher. Thanks, but no thanks, Shadow said. I can figure this out on my own. Cipher gave what must be his equivalent of a shrug. If you say so, kid. But if you decide you do need help, just give me a call. With a flash, Cipher was gone, and Shadow felt his head shooting upwards from its position on the laptop. Which was strange. Wasn't he standing just now? He looked around. Color had returned to the skies, which were painted in all the colors of the dawn. The wind was soft and barely moved the weather vane at all, and, most importantly, Cipher was nowhere to be seen. Shadow sighed, running his hand through his hair. Just a dream, then. Maybe. Didn't Cipher say he could only reach people through the Mindverse, whatever that was? Maybe it meant through dreams. And why would it contact him and not any of the other displaced students? Because you're the only one who's actually trying to go home. The only one who cares enough, a small part of him said. Shadow didn't even try and push the thought away. He was tired. He hadn't slept for more than a couple hours in days, and he wanted to get home. Maybe Cipher was right. Maybe he had to explore every option available to him. Mina was sitting in the kitchen with Izuku, Ochako, and Stan when Shadow finally walked in, looking like he hadn't slept a wink yet again. While Mina was glad they were doing the play after all of their hard work, she was also glad today was the performance. Shadow seriously looked like he needed some help. Whoa, bag check for Shadow's eyes, Stan snickered, but it faded quickly into what looked almost to be concern. You all right, kid? Fine. Shadow didn't even look at them, just grabbed one of those pit sodas from the fridge and slumped down in his chair. You didn't go to sleep at all, did you? Izuku demanded, looking extremely worried. Shadow, you can't do that again, it's not good for you. And you know just why I've been doing it, Shadow countered, glaring at Izuku with tired eyes. So whose fault is it really? Izuku flinched and shrunk back in his seat. Ochako looked at Shadow in shock. What was that for? She demanded. We told you we'd help, and we will. You don't need to be a jerk about it. Shadow ignored her, downing the rest of the cola, spiting out the pit into the trash, and striding out of the house. What's up with him? Stan commented, raising an eyebrow at the angry teen. Shadow, wait up! Mina jumped out of her seat and followed her friend out of the house. Hang on, she heard Izuku and Ochako following right behind her. Shadow was just outside, trying out more 8-letter words on the shack's porch. He didn't even turn around to acknowledge them. Don't you have a puppet show to get to? He spat his words out like they were venom in his mouth. Mina stopped in her tracks, cringing under the accusation those words held. Ochako tried again. Shadow, you haven't been acting like yourself lately. I know you want to get home, we all do. But you've been obsessing over it ever since the bunker, and it's not healthy. Her words were true, Mina realized. Shadow had been so calm when they had first arrived, cool and collected, while the rest of them were freaking out over their loss of quirks and separation from their families. But while Mina and the others had adapted and figured out how to keep their cool, Shadow had unraveled more and more. We want to help, Izuku added. And we will. We promise. We want to get home just as much as you do. I miss my mom so much. Really? I wouldn't have guessed. You don't act like it. Izuku looked as though he had been physically struck. For a moment, Shadow looked incredibly guilty. Then it was gone. An odd light shone in Shadow's eyes, one that hadn't been there before last night. What could Mina do? She wanted to help him. She wanted to shake her friend and find out what was wrong with him. But what could she say? She wasn't the voice of reason in the group, that was Izuku. And she wasn't the nicest, that was Ochako. And Shoto had brushed off both of them. She was closest to Shoto, she thought. Maybe he'd listen to her. But what if she said the wrong thing and lost all of his trust? An idea sprung in her mind, one she quickly latched onto. It could be the only way she could get him to listen. Sorry Candy and Grenda, Miss Miller. Maybe I'm selfish, but I want to help my friend. She turned to Ochako and Izuku. Everyone's going to be gathering to put the finishing touches on the puppet show and move it out to where it's going to be held. You two go on ahead and help, and I'll work with Shoto on the passcode. All three of them looked at her like she had grown an extra head. Are you sure? Izuku asked cautiously. Mina tried for a smile. Yup, I'm positive. Now go on. We'll see you later. The performance is at 4, right? Right, Ochako affirmed. See you then. After another moment's hesitation, she and Izuku started off towards the beach. Mina turned to Shoto, who was still looking like her like she said the sky was actually purple, and gave evidence for it. And also looking like he had no idea who she was, but Mina figured that was just the sleep deprivation. Should we go upstairs? Yeah, Shoto led the way back inside, and Mina followed him. Stan looked just as confused when they entered as he had when they had all left. You guys figure everything out? He inquired. Shoto gave a short nod, and Mina flashed him an apologetic smile, as the two of them made their way up to one of the few empty rooms in the house. Shoto popped open the laptop and stared at it blankly, the bags under his eyes more noticeable than ever before. Mina looked down at him for a moment, then sat down on the window seat next to him, picking up the sheet of words and leaning over to look at the screen. Hey, you want to get started on this thing? She asked. He didn't respond, not even a twitch. Or not, we don't have to. You want to take a nap or something instead? I'm sorry, he whispered, voice barely loud enough to hear. Mina leaned back in surprise. Oh, don't worry about it. I'm sure Izuku knows you didn't actually mean it. If you just apologize at the puppet show, I'm sure he'll forgive you immediately, no sweat. Her mind flashed to that bakugou guy, who had spent the first few days of UA screaming obscenities at the green-haired boy, and how passively Izuku had taken it, even defending the guy. And Shoto didn't even mean it, so Mina was sure it would all be fine. Not just that, Shoto refuted, and Mina snapped back to attention. Everything's been so tiring and stressful, and I don't know what to... He paused, made a nasty face, and swallowed. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix things. I'm useless. Hey, that's not true. Mina grabbed Shoto's shoulders and turned him towards her. Inside she was shaken. Was that really how he thought? You're not useless, no way. I can't do anything without my quirk, Shoto snapped back. I haven't been any help in any of our adventures. I appreciate you trying to make me feel better, but that doesn't change the facts. You're wrong, Mina shook her head. It was true that Shoto hadn't been much help in the more serious of their adventures, but you helped figure out the first clue to finding Trembly, remember? I was going to burn the map. She let out a laugh. And besides that, you've been the one to keep everyone in check, especially me, remember? Who knows how we'd have ended up without your caution. Shoto broke off, voice cracking, looking at her through wide and tired eyes. I don't know what to do. He looked away, especially after what happened last night. Last night? Mina asked. Shoto didn't answer, staring off into space again. Shoto, what happened last night? He finally looked back up at her. He broke off, staring out the window. Mina followed his gaze to see Candy and Grenda out on the lawn, calling out what Mina was pretty sure was her name. She looked to Shoto, who motioned to the other girls. You should probably go see what that's about. Are you sure? Mina asked. Shoto hesitated, then nodded. Mina slowly stood up, looking back at her friend, who nodded as if to say he would be fine. And so Mina walked out the door. Shoto watched Mina leave. A part of him wanted to call out and ask her to come back, to work on the laptop, to sort out the things that had been going on in his head almost from the day they came to Gravity Falls. He still couldn't believe he had actually admitted his thoughts to someone in the first place. It wasn't like him at all. But he didn't. Mina had cared enough to actually try and help him out, to finally put the puppet show down for a bit and help him find a way to open the laptop. not just yell at him about needing to get more sleep or whatever. And the part of him that felt incredibly guilty about what he had yelled back could just go away. Thank you very much. The least he could do was not hold her back from going and talking to her friends. Sighing, Shadow turned back to the list of passwords, ready to start typing in more words and hopefully find the right one. Every attempt led to another one of the beeps he had grown so accustomed to over the past few days. In spite of himself, Shadow yawned. Something blared, louder than the regular beeping noise, and the screen flashed continually red. Shadow blinked the sleep out of his eyes and stared at it, doing a double take once he was aware enough to actually read the print on the screen. Too many failed entries, data erase in 5 minutes. No. Shadow looked at the laptop in surprise and frustration, unsure of what to do, no knowing how to quench his slowly rising panic. The screen read that he had one try for the password left, and he had no idea where to start. One more try, and I lose everything. Just as he said it, there was a familiar flash, and everything around him went gray. Cipher appeared in mid-air, holding out his palms, 2 flames adorning them. Well. You're in quite the predicament, aren't you, Pine Tree? Cipher, Shadow breathed, unsure if he was more relieved or apprehensive than before. Why'd you come back? I told you I could figure this thing out on my own. Clearly, Cipher said sarcastically. Don't forget, I have a stake in this too. I want to see my friends from my home dimension just like you. So how about I crack open that laptop for you, give you a peek of what's inside? Shadow looked from Cipher to the laptop screen, which was already down a minute. He looked outside to where Mina was chatting with Candy and Grenda. Was it just him, or was she stealing glances upstairs? Slowly, he looked back to Cipher. You said last night that you wanted a small favor in return, one that could help you get back to your own world. What is it that you want? Oh, nothing big, just a puppet. Cipher scanned the room, and his slitted eye flickered towards the window. From what I've seen, you guys have plenty to spare. Not really, Shadow denied. They're not ours there for a show that's going to be put on for a bunch of kids. We can't actually trade them away. Besides, everyone worked really hard on those things. He looked back to Cipher. And how does that help you get home? It's a lot of complicated steps, getting back to my dimension. A puppet is just one of the requirements. It may not matter much to you, but it'll help me greatly. Cipher said. Speaking of unimportance, we both know this show doesn't matter all that much. What's one silly show compared to you finding a way home? Just borrow one of Sparks or Sunshine's. They've already gone to the show after all. It won't hurt them too much. Shadow assumed he meant Izuku and Ochako. I can't do that, we're classmates. We're in this together. Oh really? Then why have they deserted you at every possible opportunity this week? They say they'll help soon, but let's face it, kiddo. They'll just find something else to entertain them, and you'll all be back to square one. Shadow looked at the timer. 45 seconds, and the information on the laptop was lost forever. After all this time, he had worried while they had gone on adventures. He had spent many sleepless nights scared for his sister's safety, while they had slept easy, even though they had more parents and friends who cared about them and missed them than he did. Why should you care about their stupid puppet show? That was right, he shouldn't. He should. What was he doing? Shadow stole one last glance down at Mina. He wanted to ask her what he should do, tell her about Cipher, but there was 10 seconds left on the clock, and he was out of time. Shadow held out his hand. It's a deal. You open up the laptop, and I'll give you a puppet. Just do it quick. Cipher grabbed his hand, lighting their handshake up with flames. Now we're talking Pine Tree. Don't worry, it'll be fast. The room dimmed, and Cipher's voice dropped about 4 octaves, sending shivers down Shadow's spine. A feeling of being pulled forwards started in his hand and spread throughout his body, like he was being yanked by some force, even though he wasn't moving. His eyesight blurred and faded. Then it was back, and he was somehow outside of his own body. And yet, his body moved all on its own, crazed laughter filling through the room. His body looked up at him, and instead of a blue eye and a gray eye, they were both yellow, and his pupils were slitted. Thanks for agreeing to be my puppet, kiddo, Cipher crowed. Like I said, I'll make it quick. And with that, Cipher picked up the laptop and smashed it to the ground, cackling all the while. That what just? Shadow stared open-mouthed and almost uncomprehending at the scene before him. He looked down at himself to find that he was completely transparent, almost like a ghost. And the laptop, Cipher, you said you'd help me. I told you I'd crack that laptop open, and boy did I keep my promise, Cipher grinned, and it looked so wrong on his face. Oh god, that was his face. Something else was using his body that it made Shadow's non-existent insides turn over. Cipher walked around the room, strolling over to the mirror to examine his prize. It's been so long since I inhabited a human body, I almost forgot what it felt like. He slapped his face, over and over again. Ha! Pain is hilarious. And 2 eyes? This thing is deluxe, Shadow cringed. What are you doing? He snapped at the Cipher. Why are you hurting the body you're in? It doesn't make any sense. I told you, it's hilarious. Geez, Pine Tree, I thought you were smarter than that. Cipher snarked. I already told you, I need to be in the real world to kickstart my plans. And if I need to put some helpless, useless kid in the mindscape, where no one can see, hear, or touch him, then it's really no big loss. Cipher grinned. Destroying that laptop was a cinch. Now to destroy that journal. Race you to the bottom of the stairs. And with that, Cipher positioned Shadow's body at the edge of the stairs and fell backwards, hitting almost every step on the way down. Shadow flinched at each thump and dove downwards, slipping through the ceiling. Cipher had gone into the kitchen and was rummaging through the drawers. So where did Sparks keep that journal? He pulled out his arm, and to Shadow's horror, there were forks digging into his skin. Oh, that's right, he's gone to the puppet show with it. Naturally, kid never leaves it anywhere. Looks like I'm off then. Hey, wait. But Cipher was hurrying to pull out all of the forks, and slipping on Shadow's sweatshirt jacket, so that they wouldn't be visible. Then he headed outside to where Mina was. Filled with desperation, horror, and guilt, Shadow followed him. Mina winced as she tried to figure out a way to get out of the situation she had found herself in. Listen guys, I want to help, I really do. But I've got something really important I need to get back to at the moment. Otherwise I would totally help. Mina, please, Candy begged. We need all hands on deck. The show won't work otherwise. We're almost done. We just need your help to finish in time. I know, but... Mina thought over what Grenda and Candy had just described. Should she help her new friends with something they'd worked so hard on, or help Shadow with the laptop? She knew her answer. She had already promised Shadow, after all, but she felt horrible saying no. Before she could decline, the porch door swung open, and Shadow walked out, wearing his sweatshirt jacket. Mina perked up and ran over to him. Shadow, I'm sorry for the wait. I promise I'll help. Don't worry about it. Mina stopped cold in her tracks and looked at Shadow's wide smile. Something in the back of her mind told her to run as far as possible, but she shook it away. She wondered just how much sleep Shadow really needed. I'm going to come with you. Really? Wow, you're a trooper? Grenda slapped Shadow on the back, who nearly fell forward, before laughing it off. Guess you really pulled through in the end. Come on, let's head to the clearing. Everything's already there. Mina walked just behind Candy and Grenda as they chatted, keeping an eye on Shadow as he strolled next to her. There was something wrong about it, something that made all her hair stand up on end. She nudged him softly. Hey Shadow, you good? I'm excellent, thank you for asking, he beamed back at her, the shadows under his eyes darker than ever. Right. Sure. She frowned. What was going on? You said something happened last night. What was it? Nothing of importance, he assured her, and Mina knew there was something terribly wrong. Izuku looked up from where he was helping push some of the set walls back up after they had fallen, and spotted Mina and Shadow making their way through the different sets. He shared a surprised look with Ochako. I didn't think she'd get him to come, he said quietly. Ochako shrugged. Guess they got closer than we thought. I'm gonna go over and talk to them. Izuku looked back at the set he was propping up and nodded so that she knew he had heard her. He should probably go too. But would Shadow want to talk to him? Everything Izuku did around him just seemed to make their relationship worse. Ochako returned sometime later, looking somewhat stunned. Not only did he come of his own volition, she told Izuku, but he agreed to be the reverend in the marriage scene. Seriously? Izuku asked. Are we sure that's really Shadow? I mean, the shapeshifter is safely locked away. so I don't see who else it could be. Ochako sat back down next to him, looking just as stunned as Izuku felt over that news. What had happened that would change Shoto's mind so drastically? Izuku had a really bad feeling about it. All too soon, 4 o'clock came along. Everyone was buzzing around, with Miss Miller directing everyone to their places as the little kids came strolling in. Mina took her place beneath the stage and held up her puppet, singing along with everyone else. Inside, though, her mind was far from the play. Something had happened to Shoto, something that had to do with the night before. Something that drastically changed the way he acted, the way he talked, made it seem almost as though he wasn't really Shoto. Mina shook her head. The shapeshifter was locked away, and besides, she had only been gone for, 5 minutes. What could have snatched the real Shoto away during that time? Was she just overthinking things? The children laughed and clapped along to the performance, and soon intermission was called. Relieved, Mina slipped out from under the stage and headed towards the trees, where she saw Izuku and Ochako standing. "Hey, Mina," Ochako smiled at her, and Izuku gave her a little wave. "What happened earlier today?" "What do you mean?" Mina asked, perplexed. "With Shoto," Ochako elaborated. "You went to go help him with the laptop, and now he's acting all strange and cheery." I'm not," Shoto snapped. "Wait, hang on. What?" The three of them spun around, not to see Shoto, but to see one of the puppets floating in the air. Izuku gaped at it. "Did you just talk? With Shoto's voice?" "I am Shoto," the puppet hissed back. He turned towards Mina. "That was what I was trying to tell you about last night. This triangle thing named Cipher, who's from another dimension. When Mina was gone, he tricked me and stole my body." "That's why you were acting so strange," Mina realized. "It wasn't you." It made sense. Hadn't she just been thinking about how it was almost like it wasn't really Shoto? She had been more on the mark than she knew. "You said he's from another dimension?" Izuku clarified, still looking wide-eyed. "At first I thought he wanted to go home, just like us," Shoto said softly. "But now I'm starting to think I was wrong. I don't know what he wants. I don't know." Shoto's voice cracked and broke off. Maybe another time Mina might have joked about how funny he looked as a puppet. She might have pointed out that they had told Shoto not to stay up so late all the time, told him not to obsess over going home, and the fact that he had done so anyways had been a contributing factor to the situation he was in now. But after seeing Shoto act so broken earlier, seeing him now in this sorry state, Mina couldn't bring herself to say a word. Besides, for all that Shoto's accusations that morning were due to him being so sleep-deprived he could barely think straight, there was more than a grain of truth to them. If Mina hadn't been so obsessed with finishing the puppet show, if she hadn't brushed off all of Shoto's concerns, they wouldn't have been in this mess now. So Mina gave Shoto an encouraging smile. "Don't worry, we'll help you out. Is there something this Cipher guy is looking for? If there's something or somewhere he's trying to get to, we can stop him." "That's right," Ochako agreed. "We've got your back." "Cipher won't know what hit him," Izuku promised. Shoto stared at them for a long time, and without being able to see his facial expressions, Mina could only guess what he was thinking. Finally, he said, "Cipher's after the journal, the one Izuku has. He destroyed the laptop, and now he wants to destroy that as well." Izuku hugged the jacket that contained the journal closer to his chest, wide-eyed and worried. "We can't let him do that. It could be our only way home." He paused, looking deep in thought. Okay. Cipher knows that I have it, right? So what if Mina takes the journal and runs somewhere else with it? Cipher will probably come over to me and ask if he can borrow the journal, and Ochako and I can confront him then." Mina smiled. "Sounds like a plan. Don't worry, he won't get his hands on it." Izuku handed her the journal, and she tucked it under her arm. Now, where to go? The cliff above the clearing, maybe? That way she could see what was going on and go back down and help if she needed to. With that decided, Mina ran up the path that led to the top of the cliff. She wondered if Shoto was following her. Bursting out of the trees, Mina took a moment to catch her breath and make sure the journal was still okay. It was a pretty amazing view from up there, showing off the beauty of the entire valley. Mina walked to the edge and peered down. The puppet show looked so tiny from where she was standing. She decided to look through the journal. "There has to be something in here that can help Shoto get his body back," she muttered. Then she felt something shove into her back. For one terrifying moment, she was dangling over the edge of the cliff, looking straight down at the valley below. Then Mina was over the edge, stomach jumping into her throat as she lost her balance. And stopped, looking straight downwards, foot just touching the edge of the cliff. A bright blue glow surrounded her. Mina felt relief flood through her body as she felt herself being turned around, ready to thank Ochako. But it wasn't Ochako that had stopped her fall. There, in the reverend outfit, was Cipher, smiling with Shadow's face, smirking down at her with Shadow's eyes, which were now slitted and yellow. How had she not noticed that before? His hand was wreathed in a blue glow, the same glow that was keeping her from falling. So this was Cipher. That smile on Shadow's face and look in his eyes was off-putting, and Mina felt a shiver run down her spine. "You look to be in a pretty bad position there, don't cha?" Cipher laughed, the grin across Shadow's face looking more out of place by the second, more and more like a smile a villain would wear. "How about I help you out there? You give me the journal, and I won't let you fall to your death. Sounds fair to me." Mina hovered over the edge, unsure of what to do. She had no doubt Cipher would make good on his promise and drop her if she didn't give him the journal. She also knew if she gave him the journal, not only would they lose their only lead on getting home, but Shadow might never get his body back, and Cipher might just try to kill them again later. When you put it that way, there's really no other option, is there? A hasty plan formed in her mind. Tentatively, she held the journal out in front of her. "Now that's more like it," Cipher said. "After all, who would risk their life for some dumb stranger?" His hands gripped the other end of the journal, and Mina smiled. "A hero would, and that's what I am." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the flare she had been keeping on her since the bunker. Then she tugged as hard as she could, pushing her feet off the edge of the cliff. Cipher, startled, lost his hold on the magic keeping Mina floating, and they tumbled off the edge of the cliff together. Shadow could only watch in horror as Mina fell, quickly flying towards the ground. He dove down after her, watching her fight to keep the journal away from Cipher on the way down, but there was nothing he could do to help. She was in this position because of him. The only person he could consider calling a friend was in grave danger because of his stupid actions. The realization made him want to puke, if he had still been in his body. This was all his fault, and now Mina was going to die because of him. Just before they hit the ground near the stage, a light blue glow surrounded Cipher and Mina, softer than the kind Cipher had used. Shadow looked over to see Ochako clutching her amulet in one of her hands, looking panicked. So that must have been why Mina fired the flare, to get their attention. Shadow let out a sigh of relief. Mina wasted no time in tackling Cipher. "Get out of my friend's body, you dumb triangle." The two rolled across the forest ground. Shadow might have been bothered by the fact that she was now punching his body right in the face, if not for her words. She really thought of him as a friend. After how he had acted the whole time they had been stuck in this town? Cipher lashed out with blue flames, causing Mina to jump back. He ran towards her, determined to take the journal, but was intercepted by Izuku, who tackled him from the side. "That's right," Izuku said, pinning Cipher down. "We won't let you hurt our friend any longer." Cipher snarled, throwing Izuku off and reaching for the journal with his powers, blue flames covering Shout's hand. But before it could take effect, Ochako snatched the journal away with her own blue magic. The brown-haired girl glared at Cipher. "You're not getting this thing. Not now, not ever." Cipher lunged towards her, but she sent the journal flying towards Izuku, who caught it and passed it to Mina. "And if you were looking for a good body to steal, you might have picked one that wasn't running on now sleep and little food." Sure enough, Cipher was slowing down, looking more and more haggard. "No," he protested, falling to his knees. "No, no, no. I'm a being of pure energy with no weaknesses." "Not in a human body, you aren't," Mina snarked, running over and slamming Cipher to the ground. That seemed to be as much as the triangle could take. Everything lost its color again, and Cipher went flying out of Shadow's body with a panicked shout. Not wasting any time, Shadow dove right in. For a moment, everything seemed perfect. He was finally back in his body, and Cipher was gone. Then all of the day's injuries, as well as the exhaustion from night after night with no sleep, all caught up to him. Everything in his body screamed in pain at once, and he could barely open his eyes. He could hear the other students, his friends, gathering around him. Shadow, Izuku called out. Are you okay? Is it you in there? Shadow let out a groan and opened his eyes, letting the others see that they were his and not Cipher's. Gasps surrounded him, and he found himself hauled to his feet by gentle hands. Everything felt wrong, as though he shouldn't be in his body at all, as though it wasn't even his anymore. He had to remember to breathe. Then he was crushed by a hug. "You're back," Mina called out joyously, nearly breaking his bones all over again. Shadow's body moaned in pain. "Mina, please," he managed to get out. Mina quickly let go with an embarrassed smile. "Sorry about that," she said. Shadow tried for a smile, and even though it felt awkward as hell, Mina looked relieved. Izuku glanced towards the stage, where the play was still going on. No one seemed to have noticed them yet. "We should, tell them they'll need to find a new reverend." Shadow grimaced. "Maybe one of you could?" Ochako cut him off. "No way, Shadow. We're taking you home, getting you cleaned up." She and Izuku supported both sides of him as they walked back to the shack, Mina in front of him smiling and trying to keep his spirits up the whole way back. Something warm pricked behind Shadow's eyes, but no tears fell. After what seemed like forever, they finally reached the shack. Shadow felt like he could collapse on the spot, from both soreness and possibly blood loss from all the stab wounds on his arms. Despite his best efforts, his eyes started to close. "Don't worry," he heard Izuku say. "Just rest easy. We've got you." Shadow let his friends lead him back into the shack. He was back on the cliffside. The wind whipped through his hair, pressing against his back. Mina was there, hovering off the edge, with only his power keeping her from falling to her death. Not that him keeping her afloat mattered much. Not when he was the reason she was in the position in the first place. Shadow could feel the smile on his face, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't seem to get rid of it. A part of him recognized that he must be dreaming. After all, he hadn't been inside his body when Cipher was threatening Mina, but watching from the sidelines, unable to help. Still, the irrational part of his brain had him in a tight grip, and all he could do was watch helplessly as the scene played out. "You're in a pretty bad position there, aren't cha?" Cipher cackled, using Shadow's mouth, looking at Mina through Shadow's eyes. "How about I help you out there? You give me the journal, and I won't let you fall to your death. Sounds fair to me." Shadow wanted to scream. He wanted to reach out and help Mina, to stop Cipher from pulling off his intended deeds. But he couldn't do anything. He wasn't a hero. He was useless, more than useless. Mina was going to die, and it would be all his fault. Because he couldn't let go of his drive to go home, let it morph into an obsession so bad, he took an obviously shady deal with some obviously shady being. He was pathetic. Mina looked torn, unsure of what to do. Shadow didn't blame her for that, couldn't blame her for that. It wasn't something silly or replaceable on the line, it was her life. It made sense that she would be conflicted. She handed the journal to him, and Cipher laughed aloud. "Now that's more like it," the thing said. After all, who would risk their life for some stranger? His hands, Shadow's hands, were they even Shadow's anymore? Gripped the other end of the journal. Mina smiled. "A hero would, and that's what I am." She pushed off the edge of the cliff and pulled forward. Logically, Shadow knew how it all went down. In reality, Mina had fired the flare first, to alert Ochako to her presence, so the other girl could catch her. She had managed to pull Cipher off the cliff, and keep him off her until they reached the ground, where she and his other friends, he had friends, they actually wanted to be his friends after everything, kept the journal away from Cipher until his body collapsed from exhaustion. Cipher was kicked out, and Shadow was able to return to himself. Here, in his dream, Mina didn't fire the flare. When she pulled, Cipher got over his shock quickly enough that he was able to yank the journal away from her. With a push of blue power, Mina went flying off the cliff by herself, with no one to catch her. Cipher watched her fall to her death with a laugh and a smile. Shadow watched her fall to her death with a laugh and a smile. There was nothing he could do, no way to save her, and now his arrogance and narrow-mindedness had killed his first friend. It was all his fault, and Shadow wanted to scream and cry, but he couldn't. He was trapped in his own body, with Cipher firmly in control, and all he could do was smile and laugh as Mina fell, as she hit the ground. Shadow jerked upwards with a strangled gasp. Panic took over as he spun around the room. unable to recognize where he was, that he wasn't of the cliff anymore. His heart pounded in his chest, blocking out any other sounds. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't breathe. There was a hand on his shoulder. Shadow automatically flinched away from it, rejecting the foreign touch. The hand quickly withdrew, but its owner stepped into his line of sight. Green hair and eyes, freckles, worried expression. Shadow tried to focus on his friend's face, his heartbeat growing softer in his ears as his vision became clearer. He closed his eyes and took deep breaths, trying to steady his racing nerves. The back of his shirt was damp with sweat. He was going to have to wash that, and change the bandages on his arms. The deep cuts where Cipher had experimented with silverware still stung and ached at the same time. And then there were the bruises Cipher had gained from being hit and tackled by his friends, the sharp pains from his body being hurled down the stairs. All in all, Shadow felt disgusting. Once his breathing had mostly evened out, Shadow opened his eyes to meet Izuku's concerned gaze. He opened his mouth and then closed it, unsure of what to say. He had mostly ignored Izuku this whole time, being dismissive whenever he acknowledged him. Yesterday he insinuated that Izuku didn't care about his mom, didn't miss her, when it was obvious he did. He couldn't even blame Cipher for that, it was all him. He wondered if Izuku disliked him for that. He wouldn't blame him in the slightest. "Are you all right?" Izuku asked softly. Shadow simply looked at him, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't, not in the slightest, but the last thing the others needed was to deal with more of his problems. Izuku seemed to come to his own conclusion and shook his head. "Of course not. Who would be, after yesterday? I wouldn't be okay if it were me." He coughed awkwardly. "Were you having a bad dream? You were crying out in your sleep." "Yeah," Shadow admitted. "Sorry if I woke you." Izuku frantically waved his hands in front of his face. Oh, it's no trouble at all. I couldn't sleep much anyways, so you don't have to worry about it." He offered a small smile, which Shadow tried to return. That seemed to encourage Izuku. "It's around 4 in the morning, we could go downstairs and get a snack before going back to bed." "Okay." Shadow wished he could do more than give one-word answers and short sentences, but it was as though his throat had closed up, only wide enough to admit the shortest of responses. Still, he let Izuku help him to his feet, trying to ignore his arms and back crying out in protest. They made their way to the kitchen. Izuku pulled out 2 pit sodas, a drink both of them had discovered that they enjoyed, and offered one to him. Shadow gave a quick thanks and reached for the drink. Cipher had poured that stuff in his eyes. Suddenly Shadow wasn't so thirsty anymore. The pit soda looked about as appetizing as throw up, which is what Shadow was half certain he would do if he drank the stuff. "No thanks," he said. "Sorry." Izuku didn't ask why, just put the soda back in the fridge and poured some water for him, which Shadow took gratefully. The two of them sipped their drinks in silence. Thumping from the living room alerted them to someone else's presence. Sure enough, Stan stepped into the kitchen, looking as though he hadn't gotten a wink of sleep. He rubbed his eyes and stared at them blankly. "Mind getting me one of those?" He nodded towards Izuku's soda, who shot upwards and took another can out of the fridge, silently handing it to Stan. The older man slumped down in one of the free seats, taking a long slurp. Ah, that hit the spot. Nothing like soda after a long night. He looked at the two of them, eyes hovering over Shadow's bandages. "You still haven't told me how that happened." Stan had been home yesterday when the 4 of them reached the shack. After the initial shock, he hadn't even questioned why Shadow's arms were bloodied up, or why the 4 of them all seemed to be in varying degrees of shock. He had just helped them wrap Shadow's bandages and stayed out of their business. "You didn't really seem like you wanted to know," Shadow offered quietly. Stan huffed, looking slightly annoyed. "Believe it or not, kid, when some teenagers show up at my house with major injuries, especially when they happen to be staying at my house in the first place, I do give a damn." "Really?" Izuku blurted out. Shadow didn't blame him. "Really?" Stan seemed more amused than anything at that. "Don't go around telling everyone that though. I have a reputation to uphold." "We'll keep that in mind," Shadow assured him. He had never really trusted Stan, but maybe the man was more trustworthy than he acted. At least he hadn't almost gotten his friend killed. "We were looking for a way home. Things went wrong." "Right," Stan drawled. And the bloody silverware in my cabinets have something to do with getting home? Shoto stiffened, involuntarily clutching his arms. Izuku's eyes widened. Geez, kids. I won't pry, as long as you try to not mess up the things I eat with again. But maybe tell someone about this stuff? I don't know, might help. Izuku looked at him, as if asking if Shoto thought that idea was okay. And while Shoto was hesitant about letting even more people know how much of a screw-up he was, it would be good for people like Suze and Wendy, who had helped them on their adventures, to know about the danger Cipher could pose if they weren't careful. I think we'll do that, he said. Izuku smiled in relief. Shoto continued, more for his friend's benefit than Stan's. I don't think I can talk about it just yet, but there are people who should know. There were other things he wanted to tell Izuku, Mina, and Ochako, things he thought they deserved to know at this point. But that could come later. Shoto could feel his eyes drooping once again, and wanted to get back to sleep. Hopefully he wouldn't have any more dreams tonight. I heard from Grenda and Candy, Ochako offered, as the mystery crew and Suze spread out in the living room. They were disappointed when I told them we needed to leave, and worried when I said Shoto had gotten injured, which was their decided upon excuse as to why Shoto's arms were now covered in bandages, but things at the puppet show pretty much went off without a hitch. Not that Ochako could find it in herself to care much about that show now, not when them focusing on it like that had temporarily cost Shoto his body, and almost cost Mina her life. Ochako felt like the worst person in the world. She had seen Shoto getting more and more frustrated, known something was wrong with him before Cipher even came into the picture, and yet hadn't done anything to stop the demon thing from taking over her friend, even if just for a little bit. How could she call herself a hero after this? Especially after that note she had found. Just thinking about it chilled her to the bone. At least there's that, Suze offered. Cheer up, dudes. Now that we know about this Cipher guy, we'll be ready for him if he shows up again. No one's gonna fall for his tricks anymore. I actually found him in the journal, I think. Izuku flipped the pages on the journal, turning to one that was covered in scribbles, as well as what looked suspiciously like blood. I don't know for sure if this is the same Cipher or not, but it looks like the author had a bad run-in with him as well. Shoto peered over Izuku's side, face darkening at the page. That's him all right. Mina put a reassuring hand on his back, and Shoto took a steadying breath. The author calls him the most dangerous being he's ever encountered in this. He also says I must hide the journal before he finds it, Izuku mused. Perhaps he was referring to Cipher in that. It would make sense, Shoto agreed uneasily. Cipher wanted that journal really bad. They decided to leave the conversation with that solemn train of thought, and spent the rest of the afternoon playing all sorts of different card games. Grenda and Candy stopped by at one point, joining in on the game and conversation and worrying over Shoto's arms. He hurriedly assured them that he was fine. It was late afternoon when they decided to pack everything up and head inside. Ochako hung back, clutching the note in her hand. It was all over now, and Cipher was gone. The words he left couldn't hurt them anymore. Even so, they sent a wave of fear down her spine whenever she thought about what was on the page. Ochako, Mina seemed to have noticed her hesitation, hanging back herself. What is it? Everything okay? While a part of her didn't want anyone else to have to see the note, Ochako realized it would be better if she could get it off her chest, at least a little bit. Having decided, she lifted up the note for Mina to read. The other girl took it curiously. This was in the mystery shack, she explained quietly, as though saying it aloud would make it true, would make it more threatening. Mina's eyes widened in horror as she read the note. The pink girl stifled a gasp, before looked back up at Ochako. This really says what I think it says, Mina breathed. Ochako nodded gravely. We can't tell him, she said. Mina looked personally offended, the note crumpling in her fist. Why not? She took a step forward, clearly passionate about not keeping this particular secret. Cipher wrote this. He was going to throw Shoto's body off the water tower. Then he was going to try and do the same to us. How can we just not tell him about this? Have you seen him today? Ochako countered. He already feels horrible about the whole thing. I don't want to put this on his conscience as well. Maybe I'm not as good at telling what other people need as Izuku is, but I think this would just hurt him even more. Mina seemed completely torn, looking from the scrunched-up note to Ochako, to Shoto and Izuku disappearing into the shack, and back to her. Finally, she sighed in defeat. Yeah, you're probably right. I just hate keeping secrets like this. Me too, Ochako admitted. I just don't want to make things even worse. She had already done enough harm. She didn't want to screw things up even more. Yeah. Mina held up the note. What should we do with this thing then? The two of them stood in silence for a moment, thinking. Stan's probably got a lighter somewhere in the house, Ochako suggested. We could burn it. That sounds like a great idea. I'll go get it. Mina dashed inside the shack. Ochako waited for a few minutes before Mina returned, carrying what Ochako presumed was a lighter. She handed it to Ochako. Want to do the honors? Ochako nodded, before flicking the lighter and pressing the flame to the piece of paper that reminded them far too much of the horrible event that had occurred yesterday. Watching the flames consume Cipher's words was far more satisfying than it probably should have been. I've been thinking. Mina drummed her fingers on the table. Stan had given them a day off of work, and the four of them were eating lunch together at the shack. Mina couldn't help but notice that, unlike the previous days, Shoto wasn't touching the pit soda. That laptop was our only lead, and now it's totally destroyed. Sorry about that. Shoto looked away from all of them, eyes clouded. Mina hastily backtracked. Oh, we don't blame you for that, not at all. This wouldn't have happened if we'd all agreed to help you work out the passcode when we should have. He looked about to argue, so Mina pressed on. Anyways, I was thinking. We got the laptop from the bunker, right? What if we went back down, looked for other clues as to how to get home? I don't know. Ochako looked hesitant. We almost died last time we went down there. I mean, we seriously came close a bunch of different times. The shapeshifter is locked away, Izuku argued. If there are any more dangers down there, we can handle them. Besides, heroes risk their lives every day to help others. We can't just stop trying to get home just because it's dangerous. What's the point if we die before we even make it home? Ochako shot back. Deku, normally I agree with you, but I for one am tired of almost dying every single day. Maybe when we're actual pro heroes we'll be used TP it, but for now we're just kids. We just started UA. For Pete's sake, we're not anywhere close to being heroes yet. Can't we just wait for the pros to come and find us? It's been almost a month, Mina pointed out, her voice almost shaking as she did so. She'd been having the same thought for days now, and it chilled her every time. Still, she knew she was going to have to voice it at some point, and now seemed as good a time as ever. We don't know if the pros are coming for us. They will, Izuku burst out, eyes flashing indignantly. Of course they will. The heroes would never leave some kids trapped in another world like this. All Might wouldn't leave us trapped in a world like this, and he's our teacher. He knows us. I'm not saying they wouldn't come on purpose, Mina said, but they might not have any way of getting here. If that portal guy escaped the OSJ, they'd have to track him down first, and make sure he holds the portal open long enough for them to get us and get back to our own world. And what if the villain can't send them here? What if it's a one-way trip? We need to find a way back ourselves. Izuku was tearing up. Oh no, was he about to cry? Had Mina made him cry? And Ochako looked very much like she wanted to argue some more. Mina geared herself up to defend her points. Can we not? They all turned to look at Shoto, who looked for lack of a better word tired. Thankfully not the angry, far beyond exhaustion type of tired he had been, but tired all the same. I tried so hard to get back home, and look where that got me. He raised his bandaged arms. They all hastened to reassure him. That's not your fault. If we had been. We should have. Shoto shook his head. Thanks. But this was on me. Don't blame yourself for my mistake. I should have known better than to make that deal. You were absolutely exhausted, Izuku pointed out. You weren't thinking straight. I wouldn't have been so tired if I hadn't been so consumed by my need to get home, Shoto said. Look, what I'm saying is that we could keep throwing ourselves at every little possibility, but there's a much greater chance we're going to find something terrible, deadly, or worse on the other side than there is that we find a way home. He paused, taking a deep breath. I would know better than anyone. The rest of them were stunned into silence, unable to come up with anything. Shoto continued. I think we need to rest and regain our strength. learn more about this world, figure out just what we're dealing with before running headfirst into things again. That sounds like a smart idea, Ochako voiced quietly. I agree with Shoto. It makes sense, Izuku admitted, although he didn't sound too happy about it. We could all use a break, go try and regather our thoughts. If we're going to find a way home, we need to start thinking smarter, understanding more about gravity falls. Mina could tell she was outnumbered. All right then. I'm okay with that plan as well. And just like that, the tension that had steadily been building between the four of them dissipated, and the mystery crew was back in action. Hey Shu, Wendy leaned over the counter of the gift store, eyes lingering on the bandages peeking out underneath the kid's jacket. Suze and Izuku had told her what had happened the other day, with the mysterious cipher, but a part of her still couldn't wrap her head around it. The way it was told, it seemed too unreal to be true, until Shoto walked into the shack from 2 days off of work covered in bruises and bandages. Shoto looked up in surprise, pointing to himself. The other teens looked curious as well. Yeah, you, Wendy clarified. If you don't want me to use a nickname. No, it's fine, Shoto assured her. It was just startled is all. He walked over. What is it? I was wondering how much you knew about self-defense, as well as hand-to-hand combat, Wendy said. Shoto looked curious. I know some. I'm nowhere near the best at it though. He looked away, as if embarrassed. I can dodge very well, I guess. That's good. Wendy smiled. I can teach you a lot more, if you'd like. Wendy had grown up in an extremely interesting family. Not only had forced her to participate in lumberjack games as a kid, but instead of Christmas, the corduroys had apocalypse training. One of the other things her dad signed her up for, and one that she was particularly proud of, was self-defense and martial arts. It was the best stress reliever she had, and while she may not have been the best in math or English, she was talented enough in her hobby that she was reasonably certain she could incapacitate an 300-pound muscled man. Shoto seemed to be having a particularly rough time, and if Wendy had to guess, was feeling extremely vulnerable at the moment. Even if learning how to fight didn't work against weird demon things in a dream world, it would help him regain some of his confidence. Don't worry, she assured him. I'm kind of one of the best in the state. I know what I'm doing. He cut himself off, lost in thought. Then, I'd like that a lot. Thank you. Is this Shoto exclusive? Ochako asked. Learning how to fight like that sounds really cool. It shouldn't be exclusive, Shoto said. I don't want it to be. Then sure, Ochako can join too. It was the least Wendy could do, after she and Izuku had helped save Wendy and her friends in that convenience store. Plus, Ochako seemed upbeat and eager to learn. Wendy was excited to teach them. We can start after work, she told them. We'll just be going over the basics for now, but that's more important than the fancy stuff. Ochako grinned. We're ready to put in the work. They were all curled up in their bedroom, 3 days after the incident with Cipher. Izuku studied all the pages the author had on the being, including everything he had written in invisible ink. They needed to know what the thing's weaknesses were, and if it was the type of creature that would come back and try to hurt them again. So far there wasn't much, just a lot of desperate ramblings, although that was pretty telling as well. Mina yawned loudly. We should all probably turn in soon. Izuku nodded at her words and flicked off his new black light, a bigger one so that he could both see the whole page, and write with his pen at the same time. Hang on, Shoto said. There's something I want to tell you guys. The other three looked up at him curiously. Something I think you should know. Go ahead, we're listening, Mina encouraged him. Shoto looked at his hands before starting his tale. We were talking yesterday about whether the pros could or would come and find us. I'm not so sure there is a way for them to get us back. After all, my old man would do absolutely anything to get me back to him. Shoto chuckled bitterly. That's not actually a good thing. What do you mean? Ochako asked hesitantly. Izuku shared the feeling. Something about the way Shoto had worded it set his danger nerves off in all the bad directions. Shoto's father was Endeavor, right? The second best hero in Japan. So why was mention of him making Izuku nervous? Shoto seemed to gather his resolve. He doesn't care about me as a person. He just wants his masterpiece back, he sighed. Have you heard of quirk marriages? where two people marry for the express purpose of passing on a stronger quirk to their children. Endeavor could never beat All Might, no matter how hard he tried. Everything he did ended in failure, so eventually he turned to quirk marriages, winning over my mom's family and getting a hold of her quirk. I was the fourth attempt, and the only successful one in his eyes. Never mind that my oldest brother died because of him. Never mind that my sister and other brothers suffered horrible neglect under him. I was the only one whose quirk came out the way he wanted, so he'll do anything in his power to bring me home. He sighed. In my memory, my mother is always crying. He'd hit her whenever she tried to protect me, whenever he was in a bad mood. Eventually she couldn't take it anymore, only saw him when she looked at me. He raised his hand to his scar and poured boiling water on my face. That's what my father's obsession caused. Shouto, Mina gaped. Ochako was covering her mouth, horrified. Izuku couldn't speak, could hardly breathe. Shouto's eyes widened, as if he had suddenly reached some terrible conclusion. God, he roughly ran a hand through his hair. I've become just like him. I let my obsession with getting home take precedence over everything else, and all of you were hurt because of it. Mina almost died, my first friends, and I do this. Izuku acted on instinct, rushing forward and enveloping Shouto in as tight of a hug as he could manage. The other boy froze up upon impact, but slowly returned the affection. You're not like him at all, Izuku said firmly. You made one bad mistake, and you're beating yourself up over it. He made a lot of much worse mistakes, and he has yet to make them right, might never do so. It was sickening to think that he once looked up to the number 2 hero. That's why you almost never used your fire powers, Ochako inferred. Judging by Shouto's muffled exclamation, she had guessed right. Because they come from him, right? Shouto, that's your power, not his. He has no right to control your life like that, and he has no right to control your feelings over your quirk either. What happened might have been partially your fault, Mina admitted, but it was partially our fault as well, and mostly Cipher's fault. What happened with your dad, that's just his fault, and no one else's. You're not him. We know you're better than him. With that, she got out of her bed and joined the two boys in the group hug. Ochako followed quickly after. You're our friend, Shouto, Izuku whispered. We care about you so much. Don't beat yourself up about this, because we don't blame you at all. And whatever your father tries to pull, we'll do whatever we can to help you. Mina said, just tell us what you need. Shouto's sobs came quietly at first, then started pouring out all at once. Izuku held him tightly as Shouto's tears stained his shirt, trying to convey that he wasn't about to let go. The four of them sat there on the ground, in that group hug, for a long time. Things weren't anywhere near perfect, but they certainly were starting to get better. When Shouto woke up, it was still dark outside. It hadn't been from a dream this time, thankfully. Maybe all those days of sleep made his body accustomed to only getting a few hours each night. Was that how sleeping habits worked? He wasn't sure. His stomach rumbled. Shouto stood up carefully and made his way out of the attic, trying as best he could not to wake his friends. Something warm fluttered in his chest. His friends, they knew him, had seen the worst he had to offer, and accepted him anyways. And not just Izuku, Mina, and Ochako, but Suze and Wendy as well. Even Stan had been weirdly understanding the last few days. He found himself in the kitchen and flopped down in one of the chairs. His eyes partially closed again. Maybe he should have stayed in the attic, just tried to go back to sleep. His stomach rumbled again. Shouto glared at the fridge door, wishing he had Ochako's amulet so that he could just float an orange over to him. Without really considering it, he stretched out his hand, willing for said orange to just come to him on his own. Bright blue flames covered the fridge door, which slammed open. The orange flew into his palm. It was a new day in Gravity Falls, and the cheapest fare possible was being set up by the cheapest crew Stan Pines could find. Izuku's heroic instincts still told him this whole setup was absolutely terrible. But after nearly a month of living with the older man, he found that he'd come to appreciate Stan's cheapskate tendencies and casual law-breaking ways. In fact, Stan looked downright proud as he watched the fare being put together, Izuku and Ochako next to him. There she is, kids. The cheapest fare money can rent. I saved every expense. He threw his arms up in the air dramatically, gesturing to his new pet project. It was at that moment when something close to them groaned and snapped. Izuku instinctively looked towards the noise, then yelped and jumped away as one of the trams broke free from the Ferris wheel and went plummeting downwards. Shoto, who was apparently in said tram at the time, let out a strangled yell and his hands glowed blue. Just before it hit the ground, the tram burst into blue flames, and from those flames emerged a donkey, which bucked Shoto off it wildly and ran off into the woods. Shoto groaned and rubbed his back as Izuku and Ochako went over to help him out. "I think the tram's broken." "We can see that," Ochako laughed lightly, hauling him to his feet. "I could have just caught you, you know." Shoto looked away awkwardly. "I wanted to try using my fire." "Still haven't gotten the hang of it?" Izuku sympathized. Shoto looked disgruntled, rubbing his bandages. "It does what I want maybe half the time I use it. The other half, things end up flying around the room, bursting into flames, or well," he gestured to where the donkey had gone. "Cipher was a pretty chaotic entity thing. Maybe that's why it's all wonky," Ochako suggested. Shoto nodded. "That would make sense. Guess I'll just have to deal with it for now." Stan snickered at their antics, although his eyes seemed drawn to the Ferris wheel. "Yeah, well, you better hope no one notices one of the trams are missing, or that's out of your pocketbook." "I doubt anyone will," Izuku reassured him. "This is Gravityfalls, remember?" "You've learned? I like it." Stan smirked. "All right, kids, I've got a job for you. And Mina, wherever she is at the moment." He reached into his suit and pulled out a stack of papers with blue A's on them. "I printed up a bunch of fake safety inspection certificates. Go slap one on anything that looks like a lawsuit." Ochako took the papers. "I hate to ask this, and I think I already know the answer, but is this even close to being legal?" "When there's no cops around, anything's legal," Stan said cheerfully. Figuring that there was no point in arguing that statement, the four split the papers evenly. Izuku just hoped to get the job done quickly at this point. "Suze," Stan called out. "How's that dunk tank coming along?" Izuku glanced back over to see Stan approaching the friendly repairman, who was wielding the bull's-eye part of the dunk tank setup. "Almost ready to go, Mr. Pines," Suze said dutifully. Stan rapped on the bull's eye, laughing at how Suze had rigged it for him. Izuku sighed fondly and turned away. "It's 12 o'clock, Stan announced. Ochako covered her ears as a screeching sound came from the older man's megaphone. She looked over to see him in a swimsuit, sitting on a platform above a tank of water. "The dunk tank is now open. Step right up and dunk me, folks. Talking to you, cut-offs. That's right, muffin top, high pants. Who wants a piece of me?" Everyone threw their balls at the tank at once. Stan cackled as the platform refused to drop. "Should we tell them he rigged it?" Izuku wondered as they wandered around with their strangely shaped question mark corn dogs. "I mean, someone's going to figure it out eventually, right?" "Probably not for a while." Mina munched on her pretzel without a care. "Besides, the more cash he makes at this thing, the more lax he'll be with us for slacking off when we work in the gift shop later." "Fair enough," Izuku conceded. "What should we do for now? Any games you guys want to play?" "No rides," Shoto said automatically. "Those things are death traps." "Come on, there has to be something fun here that isn't entirely a scam," Ochako encouraged. "I mean, maybe. I'm still not sure how he rigged some of those ball games. I didn't even know it was possible to do what he did with a basketball net." Mina brightened and looked around. "You're right, I'm sure there's something he can't rig. Like, I don't know, pigs. It would be pretty hard to rig pigs." Shoto mused. "Maybe a weight-guessing game with a rigged scale." "No, I mean really, there are pigs over there that you can win." Mina pointed at a sign nailed to one of the wooden poles, saying "Win a pig," and pointing towards a large booth in which various little pigs were roaming around. Mina ran over, the rest of them following close behind her. "If you can guess the critter's weight, you can take the critter home," the guy with brown suspenders running the booth announced. Mina stopped in front of the booth and examined all the different pigs. "Oh, look at that one," Izuku and Shoto had caught up to them, and Izuku was pointing at a small cute pig with a small spot over its eye, sitting up straight and looking at them innocently. "He's so cute." "You're right," Ochako agreed. "He's the cutest of the bunch." The pig grunted softly, and she couldn't help but coo. We have to get him, Mina announced. And name him Waddles. Definitely Waddles. Shadow looked more amused than anything, although he still decided to play the voice of reason, as he had been before. Do we have the means to take care of him? Mina waved that off. I'm sure Stan's got something. He was able to get all these pigs here and keep them healthy for the fair, after all. The unfortunately familiar sound of snobby laughter drew Ochako's attention away from the pig and towards 3 girls dressed in nice clothes, snickering at them. Oh look, the blonde girl with large hoop earrings said. Looks like little Miss Alien found a long-lost family member. The other 2 girls snickered again, and Ochako felt her blood boiling. Shadow narrowed his eyes. If Waddles is a long-lost family member of Mina's, how close does that make you to that garden snake over there? After all, Mina looks nothing like Waddles, and you have all the same mannerisms as that thing. Maybe a second cousin. I think first cousin once removed. Mina's eyes sparkled. Guys, stop. You're making them too closely related, and that's not very nice, Izuku said. I'm sure that snake would never be as cruel as she is. Ochako burst into surprised laughter, Mina following right behind. The blonde huffed angrily and stomped away. Serves Pacifica right, the jerk. Mina wiped her eyes, still smiling. Looks like she can't take what she dishes out. So that's the rich girl you were talking about earlier. Huh. Izuku watched her go. All the more reason to dislike her, Ochako said firmly. I'm almost sad I wasn't able to get a joke in before she left. Shadow turned to Mina. Jokes aside, are you all right? Mina grinned at him. I'm fine, don't worry. Her opinion doesn't matter, and I'm not going to let her ruin my day. She looked up at Suspenders, who was watching their conversation curiously. Sir, I want to win that pig. She pointed at the newly dubbed Waddles. Of course, Suspenders said. For 2 tickets, you can guess his weight. Ochako felt her face falling. 2 tickets? We only have 1, cause Stan rigged the whole fair. Is there any way that we can get him with 1? Izuku pleaded. Sorry. You need 2 tickets to get the pig. That's just the rules. Suspenders shrugged. Come back when you have another ticket. Pig won't be gone by then. All right, Mina pumped her fist in the air. Let's win another ticket. Mystery crew, Ochako laughed, and she and the boys joined the chanting. It was nice, Ochako realized. She hadn't laughed like that in a while, not with everything that had happened recently. Maybe things really were getting better. They returned with their second ticket. After multiple tries of rigged games, Ochako had simply used her magic to float their way to victory in one of the ball games. They were headed back to the pig stand, clutching their prize. All right, Waddles, here we go. Mina had briefly turned around to look at them, only to smack right into a bald man with goggles and a weird jumpsuit. He snatched his fallen measuring tape off the ground and ran away. Izuku helped her off the ground. You good? He asked. Yeah, don't worry. Mina brushed herself off. Some jerks just don't have any manners. They rounded the corner to where the pig stand was. We're back. Ochako looked around the stand. Where's Waddles? You know, the pig we were trying to get, she elaborated at Suspender's confused look. Oh, someone got to him before you. Suspenders shrugged nonchalantly. Sorry. He pointed in the other direction, and Mina turned to see Pacifica with a leash on poor Waddles, pulling him away against his will. The leash was tightening around the pig's neck, and it looked like he was struggling to breathe. He's going to choke. Izuku had clearly come to the same conclusion as Mina had. She started forward, but was outstripped by Ochako, who was storming towards the rich girl with a look of absolute fury in her gaze. How dare you? First you insult my friend, then hurt a poor animal, you asshole. And with that, the usually cheery girl punched Pacifica Northwest right in the jaw. Izuku gasped. Pacifica cried out in pain, and her entourage screamed, and Blubs and Durland, their arms full of cotton candy, showed up just seconds later. Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to leave the fair on account of misconduct, Blubs said. No punching the town's richest kid like that, Durland added. Pacifica smirked. Officers, it wasn't her fault. She didn't start it, Izuku tried to reason with them. All I did was win the pig they wanted before they did, Pacifica whined. Is that really a crime? An excuse for punching a young girl in the face? Her jaw was already starting to bruise. Clearly Wendy's lessons were paying off. Of course not, Blubs reassured the blonde. Miss, please leave the fair, he said to Ochako. Mina groaned and put her head in her hands. This was all a disaster. It was beginning to grow dark, and all the lights on the different attractions lit up. It was pretty, sure, but Mina couldn't find it in herself to care. Ochako lay next to her, equally disappointed. Today was the absolute worst, she announced. Mina nodded morosely. I can't believe I got kicked out of the fair. And Pacifica went home with Waddles. That rich snot, I'll bet she's going to treat him terribly. Yeah, Izuku trailed off, running his fingers through the grass. He was clearly as disappointed as they were. If only we could just undo one thing. We could have made it to the stand before Pacifica did, and we would have, if not for... that guy. Shadow pointed. Mina sat up, and sure enough, the bald man in the jumpsuit, with his back turned to them, working on something they couldn't see. Ochako jumped up, the rest of them right behind her. Hey you, Toolbelt, you cost us our pig. The man jumped.
Huh? What?
My position has been compromised. Assuming stealth mode, he turned his watch, which changed his jumpsuit color to TV static. Color match, initiating color match. The jumpsuit changed to match different places in Gravityfalls, but certainly not matching what was behind him. See, come on, dang it! He pulled out a screwdriver and started fiddling with the watch. Izuku looked at the watch with sparkling eyes. That's some pretty neat tech. Are you from the future or something? Shadow theorized. And no, who told you that? The man was sweating profusely. Memory wipe. He threw some sort of blue wipe on Shadow's face. Shadow pulled it off, looking flatly at the man. This is a baby wipe. Want to try again? From the top? Mina offered. Maybe tell us who you really are. Ugh. The man sat down on some haystacks. You four caught me. I'm a time traveler. Whoa, Izuku breathed. An idea sparked in Mina's mind. So, she started, if you're from the future, do you have some sort of time machine or something? The man shrugged. That's kinda how it works. Mina thought about their terrible day at the fair. Losing Waddles, having to play rigged games, Ochako getting kicked out. She caught the eyes of the rest of the mystery crew and smiled. It seemed they were all on the same page. Can I borrow it, please? Out of the question, the man snapped. He brought out his weird tape measurer, the one he had dropped earlier. This is sensitive time equipment. Doesn't look like it, Shadow said coolly. You shut your time mouth, the man pointed at Shadow, who looked entirely unimpressed. So, Ochako hedged. Who are you again? Blendin Blandin. Blendin brought out his card. He looked very sweaty and uncomfortable in the picture. Time Anomaly Removal Crew, Year 2012. He put the card away. My mission is to stop a series of time anomalies that are supposed to happen at this very location. He looked around. But I don't see any anomalies. I don't know if it's some kind of paradox, or if I'm just really tired. He sat down once again, clutching his forehead. The four friends looked at each other, and somehow Mina knew they were all on the same page. You know, Izuku started, you look like you could use a break. This is a fair, why don't you go and enjoy some of the rides? I think after a long day, it's about time you treated yourself. You know what? Blendin got to his feet. What the heck? I'm worth it. He took the offered tickets from Izuku, the ones they weren't able to use earlier. But I've got my eye on you. They all watched as he walked over to the barrel ride, where Suze was manning the tickets. One, please. Sorry, dude, but you're gonna have to take your belt off for the ride, Suze said. One of your tools might fly off and accidentally fix something. Blendin handed him the belt with the time machine on it. Guard it with your life. I will watch it like a hawk, dude, Suze assured him. Blendin clambered into one of the barrels, and Suze started the machine, watching Blendin have his fun. Seeing her chance, Ochako floated the time machine over to them, and they ducked behind another attraction. Nice, Mina examined the machine. It didn't look that out of the ordinary, save for the hourglass symbol on the front. Maybe that was the point, to not attract attention. Now we can go back and save Waddles. Izuku picked up the time machine. Let's start at the beginning of the day. That way we'll have all the tickets we need when we first go over to that suspenders guy. Sounds like a plan, Everyone hold on to each other, Ochako said. She gripped Izuku's arm. Shoto put his hand on Izuku's shoulder, and Mina high-fived Shoto. Izuku pulled out the tape, stopping around 12 hours, and letting it go, and with a flash, they were all going back. There she is, kids. Stan gestured proudly towards the fair. The cheapest fair money can rent. I saved every expense. There was a groaning noise, and Izuku jumped out of the way without thinking as Shoto took his tumble in the tram. Once again Shoto's hands glowed blue, and there was a flash, and the tram turned into a murder of crows, which took off in every direction. Izuku blinked. Pretty sure that was a donkey last time. Shoto rubbed his back and pulled himself to his feet. Yeah, just when I think I've even somewhat figured this thing out. He glanced over at a slightly confused Stan. Don't worry, no one will notice the missing tram. This is Gravityfalls. I'll hold you to that, Stan promised. He pulled the stack of fake inspection certificates out of his suit. Slap one of these on anything that looks like a lawsuit, okay? Sure thing. Ochako took the sheets and spread them out between the four friends, Mina having just arrived. Because when there's no cops around, anything's legal, right? You got it, Stan smiled proudly. Welp, I'm off. Suze, how's that dunk tank coming along? Let's go win some tickets right now, Mina muttered softly. We'll probably need to cheat, but I don't think that's really an issue at this point. Out-cheat the cheater, Shoto agreed. Let's go. With far more than 2 tickets in their hands, the group ran over to the pig stand. Mina thrust them towards Suspenders. I'd like that pig, please, she gestured towards Waddles, who was looking far more nervous than Ochako remembered him looking last time. Excuse me. They all spun around to see Pacifica standing there, smug as ever. In case you didn't notice, I already won the pig. Guess you losers got yourself all worked up a sweat for nothing. Ochako groaned, glaring at the rich blonde. Seriously, why do you even want him anyways? Is it too much for you to have everything else that your parents could buy you? It's not enough, actually. I don't mind having a little bit extra. Pacifica smirked. Or a lot. Not that you'd understand. I can tell just by looking at you, you're obviously some poor person. Bet this is the only way you'd ever be able to get a pet, isn't it? Ochako was kicked out of the fair once again, earlier than last time, for the exact same reason. She decided it was totally worth it. This totally shouldn't be happening, Mina groaned, flopping down on the grass in frustration. Every time, no matter what we do, Pacifica always gets Waddles. She doesn't deserve Waddles. How does this keep happening? And yet what happens to the tram Shoto falls off always stays the same, Izuku mused, sitting down next to each other. It could be that something about the structure of the universe is preventing us from getting Waddles. He glanced over at Shoto. But Shout's powers seem to be able to counteract that structure. Shoto narrowed his eyes and thought. So you're saying if I used my powers, there's a chance we would be able to bypass whatever's preventing us from getting Waddles? He seemed hesitant. I don't know. You've seen how unpredictable it is. It could just make everything even worse. Or it could make things better, Mina encouraged, re-energized by the idea of getting around this strange time problem. It can't hurt to try, and even if things go wrong, we could always go back and undo it. You! At the yell, they all jumped and looked around to see Blendin pointing their way and glaring at them, clearly out of breath. You stole my equipment. You kids don't know what you're messing with. Give it back. Ochako didn't think, just acted. Nope, sorry. She jumped out of the way as Blendin lunged for the machine, accidentally bowling into her friends. Blendin's fingers seemed to catch on the edge of the time machine, and the tape pulled out a long way, before snapping back and sending the group careening through time. They landed on an open dirt road, seemingly in the middle of nowhere. Izuku rubbed his head. Where are we? I think you mean when are we, Mina joked. She glanced to the side, seeing Blendin getting to his feet. Anyways, whenever we are, we should probably scram. We can't just leave him in the past, Izuku protested. He's a time traveler. Shouldn't he have another way to get home? Ochako reasoned. SHH. Shoto was looking past all of them. Do you hear that? It was a loud, thundering noise, getting closer and closer. Mina let out a gasp as a herd of buffalo started charging towards them. Ochako floated them all out of the way, including Blendin, who yelped as he was lifted into the air. She set them all down safely on the side of the path. "Well, that's different," Mina managed to say, still somewhat stunned. Blendin seemed to recover from his surprise and glared at the crew. "Give it back, dang it!" He charged at them once again, and once again the tape went flying. They found themselves surrounded by tall trees, and something loud roared at them, and holy shit, that's a T-Rex. All 5 of them screamed and ran for their lives, the dinosaur, an actual dinosaur, chasing after them. Shadow's hands lit up with flames, and he sent them towards the T-Rex, who reared back at the surprising distraction. Izuku took that moment to send them all forwards. They found themselves in some ruins, and all breathed a sigh of relief. Then Ochako yelped as a laser struck the ground right next to her feet. Looking around, Mina could see chaos in every direction. There were helicopters and people screaming for everyone to run while firing laser guns at a large baby with the time symbol on its forehead, which was laughing and destroying everything in sight. "Oh, I remember this," Blendin mused. "This was the Time War. It happened blevins of years ago, when the great time baby came into power." "Right," Mina said. "We should really get out of here." With quick agreements from everyone else, they vanished into the past. There was a moment as they took in the peacefulness of the Gravityfalls fishing season sign. Then Blendin was chasing after them again, and the mystery crew was off, running from the beach to the shack, to another side of the shack where those weird gnomes who had tried to capture Mina were gathered, to a snowy forest Mina barely recognized. "This thing is getting hotter," Izuku yelled, bouncing the time machine between his hands. The machine was giving off sparks in every direction, covering the 5 of them before fading. They landed with a thump, right next to the porta-potty at the mystery fair, back in the present time. There was Pacifica, receiving Waddles from suspenders. And there was Blendin, right in front of them. "I'll be taking that," he snapped, swiping the time machine from Izuku's hands. "Why, you kids don't have any idea what you've done, who you've messed with, how many rules you've broken." There was a flash, like the flashes Mina had just seen when they were time traveling, and 2 burly men appeared, wearing futuristic clothes. One of them snatched the time device from Blendin's hands. Blendin," the other man said, his voice deep and very befitting of some grizzled future guy. Blendin yelped. "The Time Paradox Avoidance Enforcement Squadron." The men glared down at him. "That's right. And our phones have been ringing off the hook," one of them said. "There are human footprints in the age of the dinosaurs, and calculators strewn throughout 8 centuries. Mina glanced at Izuku, who gave a guilty shrug. "You are under arrest for violation of the Time Traveler's Code of Conduct." The 2 of them grabbed Blendin's arms. It was those kids," Blendin sputtered. "They're the criminals, not me. Arrest them, not me. Don't try and blame your crimes on others now." The brown-haired man said. "We're going." Blendin was dragged away. I'll get you for this. I'll go back in time and make sure your parents never meet." Mina looked down at her hands. "Well, looks like we're still here." "Guess he forgot to go back." Shadow shrugged casually. "Too bad. I'm sure my mom would appreciate the gesture." "Can he even do that to our parents?" "I don't think time travel correlates to alternate universes," Izuku muttered thoughtfully. A blast drew their attention to the dunk tank, where one of the future police had blasted off the bullseye with an arm cannon, sending Stan plummeting into the water as everybody cheered. Ochako snickered. "After everything his rigged games put us through, I can't say he didn't deserve it." "'Cause he totally did," Mina chimed in. Still, she couldn't help but be drawn towards the scene of Pacifica horribly handling Waddles, who obviously didn't want to go with her. Shadow tapped her shoulder lightly. "Izuku thought my power could change the flow of time, right? We might not have been able to test that theory, but..." He held out his hand towards Waddles, and Mina watched the pig glow blue. There was a flash. Shadow let out an undignified yell, and there, in place of a pig, was now a small brown bear cub, a patch of darker fur around one of his eyes. Pacifica shrieked and dropped the now far more dangerous Waddles, who happily trotted over to them and sat down in front of the crew, huffing contentedly. There was another flash, and Waddles was a pig again. "I didn't mean to do that." Shadow's eyes were wide. "I just wanted to bring him over." "I don't think you need to worry about it," Izuku laughed. Mina picked Waddles up and hugged him tight as Pacifica ran away. Waddles doesn't seem to mind very much. They were walking through the fair at night. This time, with their very own pig bear, Waddles seemed to be able to control his transformations between species and had scared off Robbie when the older teen had come over to antagonize them. It was peaceful, Izuku decided. He hoped there would be more days like this ahead of them. Mina frowned, looking into her snow cone. You know, we never did find out what was with all those anomalies Blendin was looking for. Izuku paused, then slapped his forehead. Of course, we were the time anomalies he was looking for. Now that just makes my brain hurt. The pink girl sighed. Whatever. All's well that ends well, right? Except for poor Blendin, Ochako commented. Think he'll ever come back for revenge? No way. They put him under arrest. Remember? Izuku assured her. We'll probably never see him again. Not that he didn't feel a bit guilty, seeing as it really wasn't Blendin's fault for just doing his job, but the guy had threatened to erase them from existence, so Izuku wasn't feeling too generous. Shoto gave a small smile. We should probably head back to the shack. It's getting late. And so, with hearts and bellies full, the mystery crew and their new pig bear pet walked back home, ready for a brand new day of adventure that was surely awaiting them tomorrow. The car slammed into the parking space, driving far over the end of it and crashing into the wheelchair sign posted in front of it. Ochako scrambled out of the car, her friends behind her. Stan and Suze stepped out of the front seats. Here we are, Stan motioned to the store in front of them. The Summerween superstore. It looked pretty average, with a nice sign and a giant inflatable bat sitting on top of it. Hang on, Shoto frowned at the sign. What do you mean, Summerween? Ha, that rhymes, Suze smiled. Mina chuckled good-naturedly. Summerween, Stan explained. The people of this town love Halloween so much they celebrate it twice a year. Of course they do. Stan, nonplussed, pulled out a calendar and pointed to the date. And wouldn't you know, it's today? How come we haven't heard about this before? Ochako asked. Stan shrugged. It's sort of a one-day only kind of thing. Do you always keep that calendar in your pocket? Izuku wondered. Stan shifted awkwardly. Yes. Anyways, it's a good chance to scare kids and steal their candy, so what's not to love? He has a point. Ochako turned to her friends and grinned. How could we say no to a night of getting lots of free candy? Exactly. Now everyone inside, if we want to get as much free stuff as we can, we'll need to work fast. With that, Stan ushered them inside the doors. Mina slipped inside the store first, jumping into one of the wheelbarrows the superstore had to carry items in. As though reading her mind, Shoto grabbed the handles and pushed her as fast as he could in the narrow hallways while Mina laughed, pointing forward dramatically. To the costume aisle. Hang on, wait up, Ochako and Izuku followed suit, and neither could keep the smiles off their faces. Ochako noticed Suze pressing the different skeleton heads in another aisle. I'd lend you a hand, but I don't seem to have any, one of them said. Suze chuckled. This guy tells it as it is. They reached the costume aisle, where Shoto and Mina were already browsing. Mina was frowning at the different costumes. It's too bad we can't dress up as heroes here, seeing as none of them exist in this world. Not to mention that might not count for dressing up, Shoto added, considering the fact that we're heroes ourselves, even if we are still in training. What about dressing up as villains? Ochako suggested. Go for some real opposites in our costume choices. Izuku shifted uncomfortably. I don't know about that. Seems a little bit too much. Not to mention no one knows about any villains here either. Besides, who would we dress up as? Handjob? Mina snorted. Shoto choked on air. Izuku went into a hacking fit, and Ochako found a laugh tearing from her throat. Mina turned back to the costumes, a smile on her face. How about these? She pulled a few costumes off the rack. Adventurers. That's what we've become here anyways, isn't it? And Izuku can use that knife from the bunker for added effect. Izuku brightened, pulling the knife out of his pocket. It's actually even cooler than I first thought. I know the author said it was a magic knife, but they never mentioned how to use any of that magic. I've been taking the time to figure it out myself. He rubbed his finger over one of the symbols on the hilt, and the knife started glowing softly. Check it out. Instant flashlight, no batteries required. Useful, Shoto agreed. Nice. And I've got my trusty grappling hook to complete my costume, Mina posed dramatically. I left that at the shack. But it's there, and I can use it. All right then, Ochako pulled 4 different adventurer costumes off the racks, stacking them in the air in front of everyone. Looks like we've got what we need. We'll need bags to put the candy in, Shoto corrected. And something for Waddles, Izuku added. Is there anything that could fit a pig and also a bear? I think the fact that he can turn into a bear is a costume in and of itself, Ochako pointed out, as Shoto carefully avoided their eyes. Ochako wondered if he still felt bad about that. They re-emerged from the costume aisle to see Suze pressing as many skeleton heads as he could, as well as Stan carrying around a barrel of blood, which seemed to be leaking, taking his time to stop and scare some babies. The woman working there looked pissed. Have the police come and eject the Pines family from the store, she said. Not today, Stan threw a smoke bomb on the ground in front of her, and while she yelled and covered her eyes, the 6 of them ran past her, throwing all their things into the car. Stan stomped on the gas, deflating a blow-up watermelon in the process. You paid for this stuff, right? Izuku wondered. Stan waved him off. Of course. Let's move. And they speed off as fast as Stan's old car could take them. Your costumes are looking great, dudes, Suze said. He was wearing blue face paint over his eyes, a blue cape, no shirt, and yellow and blue pants. Izuku wondered if he was dressed as something they didn't have in their world. I'm sure you'll get lots of candy. Oh, absolutely, Mina grinned. This is going to be the best Summerween ever, and not just because it's our only Summerween ever. This will be my first time celebrating any kind of Halloween, Shoto admitted. Old man hated the holiday. I'm kind of excited, actually. You should be, Izuku gave him a reassuring smile. I went out for a while when I was a kid, and I had a blast. Until the blast part was a bit more literal. Then he stopped, if only to evade Kaken for one night. Well, you dudes better watch out for ghosts and goblins, Suze advised. Not to mention, he grabbed a flashlight and put it under his chin. The Summerween Trickster. He wriggled his fingers for effect. What's that? Ochako asked. I mean, I can kind of guess, but... The Trickster goes door to door, so the legend goes, eating children who lack the Summerween spirit, Suze informed them. Well, you don't need to worry about us, Mina said brightly. We've got spirit to go around. Also, does 15 still count as children? Shoto wondered as the pink girl popped a candy in her mouth, promptly spitting it out in disgust. Ugh, what is this stuff? I've never even heard of these brands. She pulled out a few candies. Sand Pop, gummy chairs, Mr. Adequate Bar, she waved the last one around. Are these normal for this world? Nah, it's still the cheap stuff here as well, Suze shrugged. But you'd best not show your discontent, lest the Summerween Trickster hear you. Well, he's welcome to this candy if he wants it. Mina put the candies back into the bowl. Consider it a donation, in the spirit of Summerween. The doorbell rang, and they all turned towards it. Trick-or-treaters, Stan called out from another room, where he seemed to be preparing to frighten off some hapless children. Quick, give them some of that terrible candy. Izuku grabbed the bowl, and the 4 headed towards the door to greet the trick-or-treaters. Happy Summerween. Wendy, Robbie. Izuku widened the door to let them in. What are you guys doing here? He noticed Robbie's arm was slung around Wendy. Were they dating? Wendy hadn't mentioned. Forgot my jacket here, Wendy said, rolling her eyes and grabbing said jacket. Again, ugh. Well, it was good to see you anyways, Mina offered. Wendy smiled. Yeah, it's real nice. Real nice of Stan to let me off early too. She looked at Shoto and Ochako. You guys practicing what I taught you, like I said? Every night, Shoto said. Ochako nodded in agreement. Wendy bumped Ochako's shoulder fondly. That's great. We'll work on it more tomorrow, okay? Fine with me. Robbie huffed dramatically, obviously put off by being ignored. He focused in on the bowl in Izuku's hands. What's the bowl of candy for? He mocked. You kiddos going trick-or-treating? Yeah, we are, Ochako scowled at him, obviously still pissed at him for his demeaning words in the convenience store, as well as the occasional time where his dramatics stopped them from getting Waddles a few days ago. You got a problem with that? Robbie sneered down at her. Yeah, duh. Halloween and Summerween are for babies, everyone knows that. I'm sorry you feel that way. Izuku smiled up at him. I'm personally excited. I mean, who would turn down a whole night of being able to get free candy? As long as it isn't that weird cheap stuff, of course. Claiming to be too cool for Summerween sounds like you're compensating for something, Shoto added dryly. Your own deep insecurities. Perhaps, Izuku forced down a laugh. Ochako and Mina didn't even try. Even Wendy chuckled a bit, sending an apologetic look at her boyfriend when he sent a hurt look her way. You do you guys? I think it's cool that you're still into this kind of stuff at your age. If you feel sick of it though, Tambry is throwing a party we're heading to, you could come join us. She gave them an orange slip of paper with the address. Mina looked the paper over. Thanks for the offer, we'll think about it. Wendy and Robbie drove away, and soon after Candy and Grenda arrived. Candy was fittingly dressed as a piece of candy, and Grenda had gone simple and classic by dressing as a witch. The four friends quickly changed into their outfits and regrouped as someone rapped on the door. I've got it. Mina swung open the door. Hello there, how has your Summerween been going? Silence, the deep voice from outside said. You have insulted me, and for this you must pay. With your lives. The person leaned in, revealing a small orange pumpkin mask on their head. That's a pretty cool costume, Mina looked up at him. Izuku looked down, however, and couldn't help but notice that his legs were far too skinny to be real human legs. Mina? He looked upwards at the thing. You think I'm funny? The thing ducked inside the house, just as a boy in a pirate costume came trotting up their steps. The thing took one look at the boy and opened its massive mouth beneath the mask, swallowing the kid whole. Did he just see? Izuku drew his knife. Mina drew her grappling hook. Blue flames lit up Shadow's hands, and a glow surrounded Ochako's necklace. What did you just do? Ochako demanded, hands shaking slightly. How could you do that to him? Oh, put the toys away. They can't hurt me, the trickster scoffed. There's only one way to avoid his fate. I need treats. If you can collect 500 pieces of candy, he pulled a jack-o'-melon out from under his coat and lit it with his finger. And bring them to me before the last jack-o'-melon goes out. I will let you live. You're asking the impossible, Shoto snapped. 500 pieces in one night? Seriously? Blue fire arched from his palms and towards the trickster, but dissipated on contact. This is my night, boy, the trickster said coolly. Like I said, your little magic tricks won't work, not on the night of the Summerween trickster. He backed out of the doorway. The choice is yours, children. You must trick or treat, or die. And with that, he leapt away, vanishing as quickly as he had come. Who was that guy? Candy wondered as they rushed out to try and spot him. It's the legend Suze told us about, Izuku informed them. The Summerween trickster. Apparently we angered him somehow. He thought back to what they had done and said that night. Maybe it was our talk about those offbeat brand candy. What do we do? Grenda shook Shoto, who looked mildly uncomfortable at the action. Suze rushed out of the shack. What's going on? Is everything all right? I heard a ruckus. Suze, Mina ran over. The Summerween trickster is real. He said if we don't get 500 pieces of candy in one night, he's going to eat us. I got a picture, Candy showed him. Suze gasped. Oh no, you guys are in crazy bonkers trouble, he exclaimed. Izuku mustered up his courage. Guys, I know we can figure this out. We've got the brains, the spirit, the strength, the courage. I know we can get 500 pieces before the end of the night. All 6 of them cheered him on, and Izuku internally sighed with relief. We could also just head to the store real quick, Shoto offered. They all paused and exchanged glances. That sounds like a good idea. Then we wouldn't have to be scared when we really trick or treat. I'm all for not dying. And so Suze brought around his truck, and they all headed to the store. As they drove down the streets, Suze pulled to a sudden halt. Why are we stopping? Grenda peered over the back seat to get a better look. Oh, it's the trickster guy. Not so fast, the trickster hissed. You think I would let you off with something cheap like that? Loopholes? Suze suggested. I'm flooring it, guys. He put on a burst of speed, and they drove right through the Summerween trickster, splitting it apart entirely. Mina looked behind them cautiously. Did we get it? It might regenerate, Izuku warned. We should be on guard. Sure enough, the pieces started flying back together. They reassembled into a much more monstrous form, spindly legs and arms poking out of a black, lumpy body. The trickster screamed and lunged, landing on the top of the car roof. Izuku couldn't help but let out a yell as the glass around them cracked and the top of the car dented. Suze swerved, knocking the trickster off, but crashing through the store window and several aisles of items. They all crawled out of the car, coughing, as the trickster entered the store. We have to hide, Shadow hissed, and they all ran, hiding in the lower empty shelves. The trickster crawled around, searching for them. Izuku was quiet enough that he could hear his breath. Ochako was shivering next to him. We have to escape, Candy whispered. What if it sees us? Grenda worried. If only we had something we could use to cover our faces and bodies with, Suze mused, standing in between a bunch of costumes. You know, like a disguise or something. They all gave each other small grins and dressed as quickly as they could, before sneaking around the aisles, pausing whenever the trickster came their way. They had made it to the exit when Shadow turned around and glared. Suze, Izuku looked to see Suze hovering by the skeleton heads, hand poised to press one of them. Suze, don't you dare, the other boy hissed. They all ducked behind the cash register. Sorry dude, today's been way stressful. I need some levity. Izuku could barely breathe as Suze pushed down on the skeleton, cackling at its dumb joke. Ochako let out a tiny gasp as the trickster stood up behind him, drooling from its rows of pointed teeth. Then it opened wide and swallowed him whole. At that, Izuku couldn't take it anymore. Hey, trickster! He pulled out his knife and charged, slicing the thing's hand off. The others grabbed weapons from another aisle and quickly joined in at hacking away. Grenda licked her lips. Saltwater taffy? What? Really? A piece of the trickster landed on Izuku, and against his better judgment, he sniffed it. Wait, this is candy. You haven't figured it out yet? The trickster grabbed each of them in its arms. Look at my face. It pulled off the mask, revealing. So it was the comment about the off-brand candy that made you mad, Izuku realized. That's what I thought. It was the only thing that made sense. That's right. Did you ever stop and think about the candy at the bottom of the bag? The trickster complained. Not really, Mina admitted. Shadow elbowed her. Every year, the children of Gravity Falls throw away all of the rejected candy into the dump, the trickster continued. So I seek revenge on the picky children who cast me aside. No one would eat me. The trickster smiled. But now, I'm going to eat you. He brought a thrashing candy closer to his mouth. Izuku could only watch in horror. But before he could bring the girl any closer, the trickster started hacking and gasping. His stomach stretched out wider and wider until Suze burst forth, screaming with reckless abandon. Suze, Izuku cried, relieved. His friends echoed the sentiment. Suze munched happily on his candy. Sup, bro? The trickster screamed, candy flying from his mouth as he toppled over, falling defeated to the ground. Suze continued to munch, and the trickster looked up, surprised. Wait, you actually like me? You think I taste good? Suze shrugged. Sure. All I've ever wanted is for someone to say that I was good. The trickster leaned back, content, crying tears of candy corn. I'm so happy. Then it faded away completely. The other kid burst out of the candy. Phew, I've been traumatized. Shadow looked at the rest of them awkwardly. Should we get to trick or treating now? Mina shook her head, as to escape the afterimage of what they had just witnessed. Why, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's go. They finally made it back to the shack, hearts and candy bags moderately full. Hey Stan, Shadow called out as they walked into the living room, where Stan was watching a silly old movie. Grenda, Candy, and Suze greeted him after the four friends had entered. How's it hanging? Stan smiled and waved. Hey you guys? Wendy was at the table, carving a jack-o'-melon. Guess you decided not to go to the party, she shrugged when they shook their heads. You didn't miss much, it was pretty lame. Robbie ate a lollipop stick first and had to go home. Ochako snickered. He's okay, right? Izuku worried. Yeah, he's fine. They got it out quickly. Wendy smiled reassuringly. Just injured his pride and all. It's too bad we didn't get much candy. Mina lifted her and Shadow's unimpressive haul. His bag had ripped in the skirmish with the Trickster, and by the time they had started their trick or treating in earnest, it was already late, and most of the candy was already gone. We thought about taking some from the superstore while we were in there, Ochako added, but we figured the damage we did to the building was enough for them to deal with anyways. Or rather, Izuku had voiced that concern, and the rest of them had pretended they had thought of it as well. I don't know what you kids did, but I'm proud of you. Sometimes, you need to make sure you don't take everything with you, to raise less suspicions. But speaking of candy, Stan reached behind his chair and pulled out 2 massive bags, clearly taken from some spooked children. I've got enough to go around. Everyone cheered and started divvying up the candy as the Summerween movie marathon continued, and even Waddles got in on the chowing down, growling contentedly at Shouto's side in bear form. You know, kids, Stan said, I've been thinking. At the end of the day, Summerween isn't about candy, or costumes, or even scaring people. It's a day when the whole family can get together and celebrate what really matters, pure evil. He cackled evilly, and everyone else, Gravityfalls citizens and heroes in training alike, couldn't help but join in. I ate a man alive tonight, Suze said. No one had any proper response to that. The screen is turned on hastily, and a cardboard cutout is shown in front of the camera. Izuku. Okay, this is now a hero's guide to Gravity Falls number 76. That thing? A strange naked and hairy little man thing is shown, shoveling heaps of Summerween candy into its mouth. It grabs one of the jkawsome bags used to store the candy. Ochako, no, put it down. It looks at the screen curiously, like a cat about to sew something they know is wrong. Then it licks the side of the bags. Mina, oh, gross. The screen changes to show Shouto, decked out with stuffed animals wrapped around him for protection, a gold club in one hand and a bucket in the other. Shouto, all right, time to capture this thing. Izuku, for the sake of science. Mina, and for candy. He approaches the cornered thing, which hisses at him, one hand still stuck in the bag of candy. He drops a piece of candy, and the thing lunges towards it. Shouto slams the bucket down, but the thing is quicker, scrambling up the side of the wall and out into the shack. The camera shakes as everyone runs after it. Ochako, save the candy. The thing scrambles into the living room, where Stan is watching television. The thing drops the candy, becoming transfixed on the screen. Stan doesn't even acknowledge it. Shouto, I guess the thing's never seen a TV before. Mina walks into the camera vision. Mina, ha, dumb things getting swept up in them. Mina turns to the TV. Mina, actually, that's a pretty good show. The image cuts to everyone spread out around the chair, watching the show. The thing is eating the golf club as the 4 young heroes munch on candy. Shouto, shouldn't we do something about that? Ochako, candy now, monster later. Izuku turns to the camera, not even looking as he hands the thing another golf club to munch on. Izuku? Well, I guess that's it for a hero's guide to Gravity Falls. Next episode will probably be about actually getting rid of the candy-eating monster. Izuku waves, and the camera cuts out. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 4. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author jkawsome on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.